Everyone in this mortal world knew that the descent of the evil gods marked the end of humanity. The gods engaged in a brutal battle and plunged humanity into a veritable abyss of despair. However, the mortal danger also promised unprecedented rewards, which literally drove people crazy. The young man admitted that he always wanted to get everything he dreamed of. But upon reaching the final, he became disappointed. The boy stated that he refused to become one of these disgusting divine entities. Kieran Riviere added silently that he now wished to return to his ordinary, unremarkable life. The young man realized that he incredibly wanted to look again at his family, dear friends, and beloved. The guy decided that this was exactly the world that he would like to see again with his own eyes. Kieran Riviere recalled how his girlfriend once asked him out on a date this weekend. The young man realized that he had to activate the C-rank card to turn back time and return to the past. The guy promised that he would collect all the high-ranking cards and destroy every vile god. Kieran knew that 10 years ago the gods had forced a game upon humanity that would become both a great disaster and an opportunity. Riviere understood that he was the only person who could go through all the dungeons and become the winner. The gods asked the last representative of humans if he understood that by becoming a god, he would gain true immortality. The higher beings added that Kieran Riviere does not understand that he is giving up the power to rule this universe. The gods asked the winner of the Day of Imprisonment game once again whether he wanted to become omnipotent for this universe. The young man added that he was completely confident in his refusal, because he had lost too many people along the way. The guy said he made the smartest decisions in every dungeon, but still lost loved ones. The gods said that they were curious to know what Kieran Riviere truly desired as a reward. God has declared that now is the time to enjoy the moment of destruction of this miserable planet called Earth. However, the young man declared that the gods' worthless threats would have no effect on him, since he had a special card. The Supreme Being screamed. Could this really be the spark of rebirth? A card that even it couldn't compete with. The deity exclaimed that he would look forward to his next meeting with this cunning little man. Kieran Riviere activated the rarest C-rank card and replied that the gods would definitely wait for him. The young man added that he would return to destroy every supreme being and end this deadly game. The guy couldn't believe that the card he activated worked, and he actually ended up in the past. Kieran Riviere thought he had activated a C-rank card, and when he opened his eyes, he suddenly found himself in this place. The young man mentally added that he had indeed managed to outplay the gods who had decided to destroy his homeland. The guy looked around and said that he recognized this place, because it was the Heerberg Selenhilfe Psychiatric Hospital. Kieran Riviere heard someone ask if the young man was seeing all those bad people again. The woman added that the boy need not be afraid or worried, because his mother is already with him. The young man, who had won the incredibly cruel game of gods, was convinced that the C-rank card had indeed worked. Kieran Riviere remembered that the Day of Imprisonment had forever trapped his mother's consciousness in the cruel game world. The young man, who woke up in the Heerberg Selenhilfe Hospital, said that he missed his mother very much. The woman noticed that she had not left her son's side for a moment. Had his illness really gotten worse again? Kieran knew that he had been a patient in a psychiatric hospital since childhood because he had schizophrenia. The young man understood that several people were indeed talking in his head at once, but those around him did not believe him. Kieran Riviere remembered that the day of confinement had come on February 23rd at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. The guy knew that in just half an hour, thousands of people would be forcibly drawn into the game world of higher beings. The young man understood that the game begins with an E-rank starting dungeon, which is quite easy to complete. Kieran decided that he had to write down the tricks that would help even his mother get through that dungeon. The young man mentally added that he must try to explain all the subtleties in the most accessible way. The woman asked her son not to overwork himself, and warned that she would go away to take out the accumulated trash. Kieran thought his father wanted to abandon him because of his serious illness, but his mother insisted on treatment. The young man remembered that after all the savings were exhausted, his father abandoned them and left the family. The boy remembered that every day his mother returned from work and tried to teach him to write and read. Placido Vernal entered his friend's room saying that he had bought Kieran Rivera his favorite oranges. Kieran replied to his only friend that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and Placido thought that he had visited him 2 days ago. Riviere remembered that it was Vernal who stood up for him when the others bullied him. The young man who returned to the past knew that his friend would sacrifice himself in the future for his survival. Placido asked if Kieran Riviere had decided to write a novel, and he replied that it was a game manual. Vernal added that the doctors had really allowed the boy to play, since they had previously said that it would only make things worse. Rivera's best friend said he understood because the guy was talking about a game in which the whole world was playing against him. Kieran asked his friend to carefully read the notes he had made and give the second notebook to his mother. Placido asked if his aunt would play too, and Riviere repeated that his friend should read this notebook. The young man added that at a critical moment, the notes from this notebook could save the life of his only friend. The guy thought that in order to protect his loved ones and defeat the gods, he would need all the C-class cards. Kieran Riviere knew that all 15 cards would be hidden in dungeons scattered throughout the world. The young man knew that he would need cards that both increase stats and applied effects. The boy who returned to the past decided that he would collect all 15 C-class cards and defeat the evil gods. Kieran Riviere noticed that there was only 1 minute left before the brutal game of Lockdown Day began. The young man who returned to the past added that very soon the last minute of ordinary life would expire. The guy heard a system notification that he had been chosen as one of the first players to participate in the day of confinement. The system warned that the dungeon was currently loading, and the young man's soul was being extracted. Kieran Riviere thought that this time he would definitely protect all the people dear to him and become the strongest again. The young man mentally added that immediately after acquiring the title of the strongest, he would go after the heads of the gods. The system window alerted the boy that the E-rank dungeon assassination company had been successfully created. The system warned 3 times that it had failed to erase the real memories of player Kieran Riviere. The young man realized that last time everything started the same way, so his notes will definitely help his mother and friend. The guy thought that there were many types of starting dungeons in this game, but they all stood out in some way. Kieran Riviere mentally added that one of the difficulties of this dungeon was the substitution of the player's memory. The young man thought that since everything coincided with his past life, the world of the E-rank dungeon awaited him next. The boy knew that the assassination company was a very low-ranking dungeon with a difficult goal. Kieran added mentally that each boss had special skills, making it difficult for beginners to deal with them. The young man, who returned to the past to save his loved ones, ordered the system to open his characteristics panel. The guy saw that he had no stats, no skills, no items, and thought he was just a regular newbie. Kieran Riviere realized he couldn't defeat all the bosses and noticed an unidentified blessing in his stats. The guy decided that this was because his memory had not been altered when he loaded into this E-rank dungeon. The young man thought that it was important for him to increase his stats as quickly as possible in order to defeat the first boss. Kieran Riviere remembered that there is a hidden side quest here that will reward you with a random map. The young man knew that the dungeon would open at exactly 11 o'clock. Which meant he had a whole 10 minutes. The boy thought that the voices he had heard in his head since childhood had become clearer after his rebirth. Kieran Riviere understood that the voices in his head spoke of saving the earth and defeating the vile gods. One of the unknown voices hoped that if they lost their memories, the guy would be able to convince them. The young man thought that in addition to being able to use all 15 C-class cards, he had access to the power of the unknown. The guy decided that he should improve his stats as quickly as possible, rather than figure out whose voices were in his head. Kieran Riviere thought that the hidden side quest must be located somewhere in this room. As the young man approached the toilet stall, he heard a system notification that the player had entered a special place. The guy kicked down the door and noticed that the system had accepted the task secret hidden in the stall of the men's restroom. Kieran Riviere thought that since the system prompt had appeared, he could begin the task. The system notified the player that he had just discovered the city's legendary ghost, Coward. The young man noticed that this weakest monster was trying to scare him away in order to protect the chest with the reward. The guy who went back in time threatened to rip the creature's head off if it didn't go away. The city's legendary ghost realized that this guy was not so simple, since he was not afraid of his grin. Kieran Riviere heard a system alert that he had managed to obtain the ghost chest of the Coward. The young man thought that the city's legendary ghost was almost the weakest enemy in this game. The system warned the guy that he would not be able to open this mysterious chest without a key. However, The guy knew that he could get the reward without finding the right key or hacking. The system alerted the guy that the mysterious chest of the ghost of the coward was broken. Kieran Riviere thought the system was often misleading newcomers with key information. The young man was delighted when he saw the basic stat cards he had obtained from the destroyed chest. The guy activated the received reward and heard the system announce that his characteristics had increased. Kieran Riviere thought it was a pretty weak effect. But even with it, he had a chance of defeating the first boss. The guy added that even E-rank stat cards significantly exceed the strength of an ordinary person. The young man realized that he had now fulfilled the basic conditions to become an official player of the Day of Confinement. Kieran Riviere thought that with his current stats and experience, he could easily clear this dungeon. However, the young man mentally added that this was still not enough to achieve his main goal. The guy knew that this level would not be enough for him to defeat the gods and save the world from destruction. Kieran Riviere added that he would have to become much stronger to defeat such powerful creatures. The young man thought that he must curb the power of those voices that spoke incessantly in his head. The guy decided that he had to figure out as soon as possible what kind of unusual blessing he had received. Kieran Riviere asked the open system window if they had given him some unusual blessing. The young man, who suffered from schizophrenia, laughed and said that no one would have answered him anyway. The guy heard one of the voices in his head answer that everything would depend only on him. Kieran Riviere turned around and saw the enormous silhouette of some great warrior made of an energy unknown to him. The young man could not imagine what exactly he was seeing right in front of him, because nothing like this had ever happened before. The guy couldn't believe that this dark energy surrounded him and completely filled the men's restroom. The giant silhouettes of the great warriors explained that they had been watching the young man all this time. Kieran Riviere asked who he was talking to and if it was really them who had given him some unusual blessing. One of the voices noted that this was just a simple trick so that the guy would get real help from them. The unknown person added that the young man who got into this game must first show them his true worth. The tall figures said that Kieran had to prove to them that they had chosen him for retribution for a reason. The young man replied that he needed the power of the voices from his head, so he would prove his worth to them. The guy heard the system announce the successful creation of the boss and the opening of the walkthrough mode. The system announced that in 1 minute, everyone who left their place would be considered as having failed the test. One of the players was indignant, asking what kind of countdown this was, and his friend demanded that they be released immediately. Kieran Riviere thought that in this world there were always idiots who were unable to assess the situation. The young man heard the system announce the end of the countdown and eliminate all the eliminated players. The people with the replaced memories screamed, asking if those people had really died because of the system's countdown. The guy thought that if you don't follow the rules of this game, you can very quickly say goodbye to your life. The players, forcibly drawn into the Day of Confinement, screamed that the passage was being closed by some kind of magic. The system warned the game participants that they should find weapons to fight the cleanup crew. One of the players yelled that he wasn't going to play that damn game, which only made the janitor boss laugh. Kieran Riviere thought that he had finally met the first boss of this E-rank dungeon. The head of the cleaning team announced that they would be cleaning up their company's head office very soon. One of those locked in the Killing Company dungeons stated that this boss should be very weak. The man declared that he would deal with this useless cleaning crew in no time and get the players out of here. Kieran Riviere warned the daredevil that the system's creatures could not be judged by ordinary standards. The young man thought that even if the mob was level 1, its attributes were higher than everyone else in this room. The man said that the boy had no right to give him advice, since he was still alive only thanks to luck. The stranger thought that his experience as a gamer meant that the kill rating would bring him a lot of fame. The man decided that if he managed to take first place, the reward would be simply unimaginable. The daredevil shouted at the top of his lungs that he would be rich and happy when he got out of here into reality. However, the boss cleaner didn't even notice the huge daredevil in front of him and showed his true strength. The players screamed, asking how a simple janitor had managed to cut the strong man's neck with a mop. People ran away in panic, begging the cleaners from the boss's squad through tears not to kill them. The boss's assistants replied that they were just cleaning up the trash, and the players screamed that they wanted to get out of there. The young man who returned to the past decided that he could not simply watch the deaths of ordinary people. The guy said that he would be the one to fight back against the cleaners who were so eager to remove all this trash. People forced into the deadly game saw some guy knock one of the cleaners to the floor. Kieran Riviere stated that they had no choice but to defeat the boss and get out of this dungeon. People were surprised that the boy decided to attack these monsters. Hadn't he seen how they had knocked out the big guy? The young man who had decided to destroy the gods noticed that the janitor he had crippled could still move. Kieran Riviere picked up the mob's steel mop and brought it down with all his might on the head of the janitor he hadn't finished off. The guy thought that after killing a simple mob, a system notification about a reward should appear. The young man mentally added that if the system notification did not appear, he must definitely finish off the monster. The players, dragged into the dungeon by force, saw that the guy had managed to deal with one of the cleaners. People couldn't believe that some guy was a head stronger than that man with the huge physique. Kieran Riviere thought that the system would award an E-rank stat card for killing low-level monsters. The young man mentally added that he was currently in dire need of attributes, so any map would be useful. The guy who defeated the cleaning monster noticed that the comrade of the killed creature decided to finish him off first. Kieran thought that in the world of Day of Imprisonment, if your stats are higher than the enemy's, you can easily defeat him. The young man who returned to the past stated that it was by this logic that this cleaner was no longer his rival. Kieran Riviere added that he would swat this monster in the blink of an eye like any other annoying fly. The young man noticed a system notification that the ordinary cleaner had been defeated and a reward had been awarded. The guy was delighted to receive another power card, which raised this characteristic to the 3rd level. Kieran Riviere noticed that one of the cleaners decided to attack him from a blind spot to avenge his comrades. The other players saw the young man swing his steel mop and cut off the monster's head. The guy confidently declared that stealth attacks wouldn't work on him, especially from such weak mobs. The young man noticed a system notification that he had received an E-rank dexterity card for killing the janitor. The cleaning crew, along with the boss, said that they had to remove all this trash from the killer company. Kieran Riviere knew there was a threat level mechanic in the game, and that was what made all the monsters pay attention to him. The boy understood that the skill of the head of the cleaning team temporarily increased the already high strength stat. The young man thought that attacking them all at once would be extremely reckless, so he should separate them. Kieran Riviere shouted that the other players should throw something at the creatures so he could deal with them. The guy mentally added that he would let the worthy people go through this E-rank dungeon with him. One of the cowards remarked that if he threw something at the cleaners, these monsters would immediately attack him. Kieran Riviere thought that all these idiots were useless. Didn't they understand his situation? The boss of the killing company shouted that the trash needed to be cleaned up and rushed towards the guy who had killed his subordinates. A young man, fighting the cleaning monsters alone, noticed that someone from the crowd decided to help him. Kieran Riviere wondered if anyone had actually decided to lend him their support and draw some of the mobs towards themselves. The man shouted what the hell that bespectacled guy was thinking, and the nerd replied that they had to help that guy. The stranger shouted that they were ordinary people who were not capable of resisting such monsters. The first boss of the killing company shouted that the trash needed to be cleaned up and turned his gaze to the botanist. The young man who had carried out Kieran Riviere's request shouted that the boss was now running after him. The guy, frightened by the boss's lightning-fast reaction, added that he had distracted the boss, but what now? The young man quickly dealt with the remaining cleaners with his steel mop and replied that everything was fine. Kieran Riviere thought that he was now much stronger than an ordinary worker, so he could kill them instantly. The boss of the cleaners raised his steel mops to bring them down on the bespectacled man and shouted that he would clean up this trash. The young man, who single-handedly defeated all the cleaning monsters, told the boss that he was the real trash here. The next moment, the system notified the players that Kieran Riviere had defeated the boss of the assassination company. The system window displayed the contribution of players who completed the first stage of the killing company dungeon. The guy thought that he didn't get this card in his past life, but all C-rank cards have great power. The young man mentally added that, judging by the rating, he was the only player who had committed murders. Kieran Riviere knew that maintaining his lead would not be easy, as the rankings include players from all over the world. The guy was well aware that the initial dungeons of the Day of Imprisonment appeared simultaneously all over the planet. The young man thought that in his past life he had emerged victorious. But even at the start, there were plenty of strong players. Kieran Riviere knew that after each cleared dungeon, the rewards would be distributed according to the rating. The guy understood perfectly well that in the following dungeons he would have to maximize his points. The young man thought that this time he had to collect all the C-class cards to become stronger than his past self. Kieran Riviere was surprised to discover that he had received a special Iron Forge card for defeating the boss. The guy thought that this card allows you to create a weapon that perfectly matches the aura of the one who activated it. The young man expressed hope that he would still be lucky and thought that a good deed could help him. Kieran mentally added that the bespectacled man did not seem like a daredevil to him, but he was not afraid to come to his aid. Riviere thanked the boy, and he replied that by helping the young man, he was first and foremost helping himself. Kieran said that this botanist was quite smart and gave him the cards from his reward for killing the boss. The young man who helped Riviere shouted that he could not accept these cards because they would be more useful for Kieran. The guy who defeated the first boss of the killing company added that the bespectacled guy deserved these cards. Riviere said that the young man should watch carefully, because now he would show him how to activate these cards. The youth who returned to the past told the system that he wanted to use the E-rank card in his hand. The guy who distracted the boss saw that Kieran Riviere's agility stat had increased by 1. Glasses declared that everything was now clear to him and activated the first boss's victory cards given to him. Simon Placid noticed a system window that alerted the boy that his base stats had improved. The young man noticed that he had been awarded experience points despite not having killed a single mob in the dungeon. Kieran Riviere said Simon Placid gained some experience when he helped him defeat the chief cleaner. The nerd asked the guy what level he was since he knew so much, and the young man replied that he was already level 4. Kieran thought that he had never held a card with a random effect in his hand. What kind of weapon could he create? The boy saw a system window telling him about the Pax Sapiens blade, which was attached to the boy. Riviere said it was a nice sword, and Simon asked what he meant by nice, because the blade looked incredible. Kieran thought that he had previously wielded the Fire Dragon Shadow Sword, which was incomparable to this one. Players heard a system notification that the second phase would take place in the cafeteria on the second floor of the building. Kieran Riviere noticed that nothing had changed, so he suggested that the bespectacled man play on the same team. The young man added that he needed smart people who could help him get through the dungeons. Simon Placid shouted that he would gladly follow the guy who single-handedly defeated the first boss. The boys, who had united into a group, heard the other players begin to beg Kieran to take them with him. One of the strangers appealed to Kieran's conscience, declaring that he had a duty to use force to protect the weak. Kieran Riviere threatened the man that he would kill him just like the cleaners if he continued to stand in his way. The stranger said that the guy was acting too selfishly. Did their lives really mean nothing to him? People who were forced into this cruel game realized that the young man turned out to be an incredibly cruel person. The stranger said that one glance was enough for him to understand the cruel nature of this boy with a sword. Simon asked if they really couldn't take them with them, and Kieran replied that he had already saved their lives. Riviere thought that those players hadn't even tried to fight back against the cleaners, meaning they would only be a burden to him. Placid said he would do everything he could to avoid being a burden to the guy, and the guy praised his friend's determination. Kieran said that the next boss would be the company cook, and warned that he would inflict mental infection. The system announced that the players had reached the dining room and warned them to take a seat at the table. Simon Placid was scared when he heard the cook warn him that there was only a minute left. The young man shouted, "Could this really be the boss who would fight them on the second floor of this dungeon?" Kieran replied that it was the executioner punishing latecomers, and the bespectacled man noted that it was the same on the first floor. Riviere said they would sit here, and Simon said the office wasn't that far away. Would the others make it? The young man who returned to the past replied that if the others could make the right decision, they would not be late. The players ran to the dining hall only when the timer was running down, realizing that they had wasted their time discussing their escape plan from the dungeon. People breathed a sigh of relief when they realized that they had managed to enter the dining room at the last second. The guy who stopped at the entrance noticed that they had gotten away with it and asked everyone to find a place for themselves so that everything would be okay. The executioner, punishing latecomers, declared that all who did not find a place for themselves would be expelled from this dungeon. The players were scared. Could this giant with a cleaver really be the floor boss? And why did he appear so early? Everyone who found a place at the tables heard the cook say that it was time for a hearty lunch. Simon Placid couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the semblance of food that the chef offered them. The young man took a closer look and realized that these plates contained the cooked cleaning monsters from the first floor. The guy said that no one in their right mind would eat monsters, especially when the dish looked so horrible. The system notified players that the special scene effect mental infection had been activated. Simon Placid stated in horror that the debuff had reduced his strength, agility, and spirit by a full 30%. Kieran Riviere noted that this is not all the difficulties of this stage. Very soon, things will get even worse. The system gave the players a task. They now had to eat the food served without wasting it. Simon Placid noticed a warning in the system window that his spirit would continue to fall without a snack. Kieran Riviere said that his friend was right, because the second phase of the dungeon is much more difficult and dangerous than the first. Simon said he was ready to carry out any order Kieran gave him, but he replied that they just needed to wait for the right moment. Players were outraged by the conditions of the stage, because even looking at this crap was unbearably disgusting. The young man who returned to the past thought that even for him, it would not be easy to defeat all 4 chefs at once. Kieran Riviere thought that in a standard playthrough, they should eat the food to weaken the cooks. The boy noticed that, thanks to a certain unusual blessing, he was not affected by mental infection. The young man thought that this was incredible news, because now he could use the hidden floor rule. Kieran realized that this would guarantee a high score and keep him at the top of the rankings, and bring generous rewards. One of the players shouted that he was not going to eat it, because it was better to die than to eat this vomit. Simon asked if anyone had already gone crazy, and Riviere replied that his friend had understood everything correctly. Kieran added that the human mind is much more fragile than the stats in the player's system window indicate. The distraught man screamed that he would not eat these monsters, for which he was immediately struck by the executioner. The cook said that if the guy didn't eat it, he would die, but the player kept insisting that he wouldn't. Everyone in the dining room saw how the disgruntled cook grabbed the guy's head with force. The player who went mad first tried to resist, but the executioner's grip was simply monstrously strong. The unknown guy noted that the same fate would await anyone who refused this disgusting food. The system announced that there were only 5 minutes and 59 seconds left before the players went into mass madness. Kieran thought the hidden rule of this level was to abandon the safe route. The players saw the guy knock over his plate and declare that he would not eat this disgusting food. The young man thought that the first step to unlocking the hidden passage was to attract the cook's attention. The monster asked what this guy was doing. Did he really want to end up in his soup of losers that badly? Kieran Riviere thought the second step would be to provoke aggression and kill the monster chef. The monster that had dragged one of the players away realized that this guy was no slouch, since he decided to attack him first. The young man thought that all the conditions for unlocking the hidden passage had to be met. Kieran Riviere heard a system alert that a guy had killed a cook at the counter. The guy who returned to the past thought that from this moment on, the battle of the second phase began in earnest. The system notified that all chefs were aggressive exclusively towards Kieran, and his rewards were increased by 10%. The young man noticed that the remaining cooks from various workshops of the killing company came out against him. Kieran Riviere thought that dealing with 3 monster chefs at once would be very difficult. Even for him, the guy decided that the best solution would be not to get involved in a battle with 3 aggressive monsters at once. The young man knew that by abandoning the standard route, he became the only target for the chefs. Kieran Riviere knew his risk of dying had increased exponentially, so he had to keep his distance. The guy thought that at the moment everything was going according to plan, because the monsters were unlikely to be able to surround him. The young man mentally added that he was the cook's target, so the rest were relatively safe. One of the cooks immediately caught up with the guy and asked if he really expected to run away from them. The monster chef declared that this little man would not be able to escape from him, because he would chop him into pieces. Kieran Riviere thought that this creature was much faster than he had initially expected. The cook was surprised that the player managed to block his blow. Was he really any different from the rest of the rabble? The monster activated the E-rank skill Rapid Slicing, and unleashed a series of powerful blows on the young man. Kieran Riviere was delighted when he realized that the monster chef had fallen for his simple trick. The young man thought that he didn't have enough strength to defeat the boss right now, so he had to activate the sword. The guy mentally added that he should be able to use these mobs for Pax Sapiens' skill. The monster screamed. How could this brat keep up with him? The fastest cook in the killing company. The cook said that even if the boy could keep up with him, what would he do with the rest of the opponents? Kieran Riviere knew the other chefs wouldn't stand still, so he planned everything from the start. The young man easily knocked out one of the monster chef's cleavers to make him take a back in the face of danger. The monster thought that it was fighting this brat on equal terms, but it turned out that the guy was hiding his strength. The system notified the boy that Pax Sapiens' sword skill was fully charged and ready for use. The monster cursed loudly and screamed, "Did this brat really hold back all this time to charge his skill?" The fastest cook realized that they were in trouble now, because the player had activated his unusual weapon. The monster screamed for his comrades to run away from here, because Kieran Riviere had prepared a trap for them. The young man who returned to the past declared that it was too late to run away from him, because these cooks were already corpses. Kieran Riviere cut through the powerful silhouettes of the killing company's monster chefs in the blink of an eye. The system notified the guy that he had defeated the chefs and received 2 stat cards from each mob. Simon admitted that he was nervous about Kieran's tactics, but he defeated the monsters with just 1 blow. The system warned that the chef had gone into an uncontrollable rage and had increased his stats. Kieran Riviere thought that all the hidden conditions for the 3rd ending of the 2nd stage had now been met. The guy mentally added that the difficulty of completing this stage had increased, but with it, the reward had also increased. The system announced that the points and rewards from the chef boss in this phase have been increased by 30%. The young man thought that more awards and points were the key to achieving his goals in life. The strengthened boss of the 2nd stage of the dungeon killing company asked who dared to kill his cute cooks. Simon Placid asked if Kieran Riviere could defeat such a monster, since he was at level 8 in strength. The young man thought that he would have to use all the stat cards available to him to win. The guy mentally added that in order to finish off a boss strengthened by a hidden rule, he would have to give it his all. The system notified Kieran Riviere that the E-rank stat cards had been successfully activated. The guy thought that E-rank cards couldn't increase a player's stats above level 5. The young man handed the extra dexterity cards to his partner and told him to activate them immediately. Simon Placid immediately accessed the system to use the attribute cards that had been sent to him. The players who saw this cursed, because if they had known about this in advance, they would have helped Kieran with the cleaners. Meanwhile, the chef screamed in rage, asking which of these insects had killed his beloved subordinates. People screamed that the roar of this terrible monster cook alone made any desire to resist disappear. Simon Placid wondered if this incredible power in his body was the power of the Day of Confinement stat cards. The chef, without lowering his volume, demanded to know who it was and threatened to blow everyone's heads off. The players, forcibly pulled into the Day of Imprisonment dungeon, ran away from this enraged monster in terror. Kieran Riviere decided not to hesitate, so he immediately reacted and blocked the chef's massive cleaver. The boss of the 2nd stage of the starting dungeon thought this guy was too weak to block his cleaver. The young man who returned to the past confessed that he was the one who killed 4 cooks from different departments of the company. The enraged chef declared that this little piece of meat would pay in full for the murder of his dear cooks. Kieran Riviere agreed with the giant monster's words, but noted that he would be the one to cut his throat first. The boss of the 2nd floor of the killing company shouted that this piece of meat did not have enough strength to compete with him. Players watching the battle in the dining room saw the guy fly to the opposite side of the room. Simon Placid asked if even his boss couldn't block a punch of that force head-on. The young man who returned to the past noticed his frightened comrade and told him that he was completely fine. Kieran Riviere noticed that it had been a while since anyone had called him boss, and thought it was always a nice thing to be called. The young man mentally added that in his past life, he had also assembled his own team, in which he was called the Boss. Kieran Riviere recalled the words of his best friend, who then told him that he really did make a great boss. The guy mentally added that on the way to passing this cruel game of the gods, they all died in the dungeons. The young man asked himself why he was the only one from his team who survived and reached the very end. The chef shouted that he would kill this little bastard and avenge his cute subordinates. Kieran Riviere admitted to himself that in his past life, he could never understand the reason why he was the only one who survived. The young man mentally added that this realization only reached him after he was reborn in this world. The boss of the second floor of the assassination company shouted that this piece of meat's resistance was simply useless. The giant chef monster couldn't believe his eyes when he realized that this clueless guy had parried his attack. The monster screamed, asking what had happened to the boy's speed, why he had suddenly become so fast. The chef shouted in rage that this brat was only pretending that he could not compete with him in strength. Kieran Riviere thought he was able to reach the final only because he never hesitated and calculated everything. The young man mentally added that it was all because he was stronger than each of them and was thirsty for victory in this damned game. The boy knew that anyone who thirsts for victory will do anything for it. But having won, he wanted to protect his fallen comrades. Kieran Riviere added silently that he wanted to protect the life he held dear, namely, the normal world. The system notified the guy that he had received a special memory card that would allow him to regain his memories. The young man saw that the additional reward for difficulty included stat cards and bonus points. Kieran Riviere thought it would be a good idea to see how many points the other players had scored on lockdown day. The guy noticed that the ranking included the same people as in his past life, but now he holds first place. The young man mentally added that it was these newcomers who would become the support of humanity in the fight against the day of imprisonment. Kieran Riviere knew that in the future, even more brutal dungeons would appear that would pit them against each other. The guy mentally added that he would look forward to the next meeting with his past rivals. The system notified all players that they needed to proceed to the lobby on the first floor of the company. Kieran Riviere told Simon Placide that they needed to move now, and he immediately agreed with his boss. The young man added that the others could again waste too much time thinking about escaping. Simon Placid asked his boss to wait a little, because he wanted to give him something he needed. The guy added that he couldn't help Kieran Riviera in any way, so he wanted to do at least something useful. Simon Placid said that if he were just a little more useful, the boss's job would be a lot easier. Kieran Riviere realized that there were good people in this world after all, and perhaps they were even more numerous. The young man who returned to the past did not agree with his comrade and noted that he still had his uses. Meanwhile, the final boss of the dungeon announced to his subordinates that the players had completed the first 2 phases. The main monster added that his subordinates should not hesitate to devour all these people. The system announced that the countdown had begun, and all players who did not reach the lobby were considered losers. Simon Placide asked his boss if he had killed the chef based solely on a reference. Kieran Riviere replied to his comrade that one must not forget about the basic characteristics of the monster itself. The guy who returned to the past added that people are also divided into those who are physically or intellectually developed. Simon concluded that due to his weak body, he would not be able to dodge attacks even with agility level 5. Placid thought his boss was incredibly strong and assumed he was a special forces soldier or a military man in reality. Kieran Riviere asked his comrade to stay on the stairs to convey his message to the others. The young man said that escaping at the next stage would mean automatic defeat, even if the doors were open. Simon realized that his boss wanted to keep the others alive, so he agreed to pass it on to the players. Kieran said that he would go and solve the problem of the next phase, because that monster was too dangerous for the others. Simon said that he would stay here and would be sure to pass on the secret passage rule to the others. Kieran Riviere thought that having help from other players would actually make his progress much easier. The young man mentally added that it was almost impossible to complete the 3rd stage alone due to the specifics of the boss. The guy thought that he needed to find a guy who had tremendous power in his past life. Kieran Riviere knew that without his help, they would not be able to stand against the security commander and his subordinates. The young man understood perfectly well that those monsters would easily overwhelm them with numbers if they did not unite into a group. After some time, an unknown person appeared on the stairs and called out to the guy who had defeated the bosses. Kieran Riviere was relieved to realize that the guy had actually been unharmed during that run. The young man thought that in his past life this guy was a real legend, with a special ability. Kieran Riviere knew that his name was Justin Eternus, and that in his past life he had shown his talent much later. Justin asked if this guy had told that stupid, bespectacled guy to tell the others not to run away. Kieran Riviere replied that it was only friendly advice to prevent others from losing their lives in vain. Justin noted that the boy's results in the early stages were so impressive that he had no reason to intervene. Eternus stated that he had already managed to completely unravel the rules of this damn game. The youth who had shown his talent in Kieran's past life shouted that he would defeat Riviere in a fair fight. Justin Eternus added that he will defeat this guy along with the boss of the final stage of this dungeon. Kieran Riviere stated that this hot-tempered young man is not able to defeat him because he is not his rival. The guy who returned to the past proved his words with a simple slap that stopped Justin Eternus. The young man exclaimed that Kieran Riviere had superhuman strength and asked if it was some kind of game enhancement. Simon Placide's boss responded that it was indeed the power gained from the Day of Confinement buffs. Kieran Riviere responded that Justin had understood correctly and added that he would need an ally at this stage. Eternus asked what right this brat had to suggest that they join forces to complete the dungeon. Kieran Riviere activated a special memory card to restore some of Justin's memories of the past. The young man added that his reasons could be based on the real memories of the hot-tempered guy. Kieran Riviere thought that without memories, players lacked the vulnerabilities that could unite their ranks. The young man mentally added that the gods had studied human nature too well, which is why the dungeons were difficult. Kieran Riviere thought that luckily the memory card allowed him to select which memories would return. The young man mentally added that in a past life he had witnessed the valor and bravery of Eternus. Kieran Riviere knew that this hot-tempered guy actually had a very nice and kind character. Justin Eternus realized that he had to survive and get out of here, because his younger brother Orion was waiting for him outside. The hot-tempered young man asked if they could really pass this dungeon if they joined forces. Kieran Riviere stated that they will definitely defeat the final boss and escape from the killing company. Justin Eternus activated the stat cards given to him and stated that he deeply appreciated the boy's kindness. The guy who returned to the past said that his new comrade only needed to hold off some of the monsters for a little while. Kieran Riviere activated E-rank enhanced cards to increase his strength stat to level 7. The young man mentally added that even with this, it would be incredibly difficult for him to fight the next boss. The guy activated the special Chef's Surprise buff card to receive a temporary strength bonus. Kieran Riviere knew that, according to hidden rules, he could gain 2 more levels of power to defeat the boss. The boss's subordinates were disappointed that only 2 players came to them, which would be difficult to feast on. Justin Eternus was stunned when he realized that the monsters in the form of guards were emitting an incredibly eerie aura. The hot-tempered boy, remembering that he had to protect his younger brother, thought that they might not be able to cope. Kieran Riviere loudly declared that they would kill them all, although he alone would be quite enough for this. The system notified players that their strength had been increased by 1 level for completing the bravery quest in stealth. The young man who returned to the past declared that since his strength had exceeded 10, he was now the boss. Justin Eternus thought that his comrade was acting too rashly, that he had decided to set him up. The guy knew what it was like to fight an opponent whose strength you didn't know, because he had participated in underground fights. Justin Eternus understood that in such cases the best strategy was not to attack the opponent at all. The young man, who decided to protect his younger brother, thought that they needed to watch the enemy's movements. Justin Eternus understood perfectly well that in this case, they would have the opportunity to dodge at the right moment. The hot-tempered guy knew that in such moments he could often hit his opponent very accurately and painfully. The monsters in the guard uniforms screamed that they must devour this arrogant brat with a sword. The young man, who remembered some of the real memories, knew that rushing at the monsters like this was a huge mistake. The monsters screamed that they didn't even have to try, because this crazy guy was a real weakling. Kieran Riviere pounced on the first monster without hesitation and cut its body in half with 1 movement. Justin Eternus realized that with such strength and speed, his comrade did not need to be careful at all. The final boss's subordinates shouted that they should use a special skill and surround the young man. The system warned players that they had 1 minute to get to the lobby. Kieran Riviere realized that he had failed to finish off the monsters in the form of the killing company's guards in time. Justin Eternus realized that the other players had to enter the lobby now to avoid being eliminated from the game. The guy who returned to the past thought that monsters would immediately attack people without characteristics. Kieran Riviere knew that one of the hidden rules of these monsters forced them to attack the weakest players. The young man realized that he had to kill as many of the guard-shaped monsters as possible to protect the others. Simon Placid asked people not to worry and to go out into the lobby one by one, as they had plenty of time. Kieran Riviere realized that his comrade was very smart to have understood his intentions so accurately. The bespectacled man thought that his boss hadn't ordered the other players upstairs to be detained for no reason. There was definitely a reason for that. Simon Placid added silently that now he could only get everyone inside at the last moment. Justin Eternus thought that since the monsters were so weak, he could help Kieran finish off a couple. Riviere shouted that his new comrade should not interfere in this fight, because his job was to protect the others. One of the monsters, dressed as a security guard for the killing company, noticed that new humans were arriving in the room. The monster said that this guy was too strong, so they had to kill others to regain their strength. Kieran Riviere thought it was time for Justin Eternus to show off his skills and abilities as an underground fighter. The monster, having decided to regain its strength, shouted that it would start killing weak players from this red-haired guy. Justin Eternus screamed for the monster to die and boldly charged at the monster in the guard's uniform. The young man who defends the weak players added that this creature should not even think about killing other people. Justin Eternus thought that Kieran Riviere was not obligated to save all the players, and decided that there were reasons for this. The boy, who decided to return to his younger brother, asked himself why these monsters were so impenetrable. Simon Placid told the others that they should stand back and not attract the monster's attention. The botanist added that Kieran Riviere and Justin Eternus would definitely get them all out of this damn dungeon. The players screamed, trying to support the young man with the sword so that he could finish off this sinister creature in the form of a guard. Kieran Riviere realized that his Pax Sapiens blade skill was fully charged and ready to activate. The monsters screamed that now was the perfect moment to pounce on this weakling and tear him apart. Kieran Riviere said their thoughts were incredibly similar, as he was currently thinking the same thing. The young man who had returned to the past slit the throats of all the monster guards surrounding him in an instant. Simon Placid exclaimed that his boss was just an incredibly cool person, and the others agreed with the young man. Justin Eternus asked himself where this guard got so much stupidity from, and thought that he was pathetic in comparison. The guy who defeated the previous bosses said that now it was time to deal with the head of the guards. The final boss remarked that killing someone like this sword-wielding youth would give him incomparable pleasure. Kieran Riviere thought this fight would be the hardest of them all, but the stats were on his side. Simon Placid noticed that the monster was level 10 and asked if they had any chance at all. The young man thought that in his past life, many people had tried to defeat this terrifying creature. Kieran Riviere mentally added that this time everything would be different, because he alone would be enough to win. The guy who returned to the past understood perfectly well that in this life he had no chance of losing to the head of security. The final boss of the killing company thought that this brat had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. However, the young man was not even going to give up, because he was completely confident of victory in this battle. Kieran Riviere activated Pax Sapiens' special ability to cut down the giant beast. Players watching the final boss battle couldn't believe their eyes when the creature's head flew off. Kieran Riviere thought that killing monsters in guard clothes would reward them with enhanced E-rank cards. The guy mentally added that for completing the dungeon alone, all the items would be his alone. People couldn't believe their eyes, because this young man easily defeated the strongest boss of the dungeon. Kieran Riviere thought that all that was left was to kill the last ordinary guard, and the killing campaign would be completed. Justin Eternus cried out that his next blow would be the last on this vile monster in the form of a guard. The last creature in the form of the security guards from the killing company sent this man to hell, where he belongs. Kieran Riviere decided to intervene in his comrade's battle and said that he didn't need to take such a risk. Justin Eternus mentally called himself a weakling, because this guy had killed such a formidable opponent so easily. The system notified players that the starting dungeon, Killing Company, had been successfully completed. People were surprised that they actually managed to survive in this terrible place, because it was quite a task. Kieran Riviere thought that players were given a base reward for surviving, which would increase their chances in the future. However, the young man mentally added that the newfound power would inevitably push people towards complete lawlessness. The young man decided that in this life, He had to create a set of laws for the players of the day of imprisonment as soon as possible. The guy mentally added that to do something like this, he would need the support of influential people from the real world. Kieran thought that his first place in the global ranking would make such people seek him out on their own. The system notified that after completing the dungeon, all the stats of the winners were increased by 1 level. Simon Placid couldn't believe that even he had been awarded a reward for completing this terrifying dungeon. Justin Eternus noticed that after this bonus, he actually began to feel much stronger. Kieran Riviere thought that his level 15 strength seemed simply outrageous compared to the others. The system notified players that they would now be awarded a reward for their personal performance in the dungeon. Kieran Riviere thought that even he couldn't imagine what the reward would be for his 99% contribution. Simon Placid saw a system notification that he had been awarded an E-rank stat card. Justin Eternus realized that for his contribution to the victory, the system window had given him an E-rank strength and endurance card. Kieran Rivera's teammates wondered just how colossal the reward for top spot would be. The young man who returned to the past was surprised by his reward, because it was the first time he had received such unusual cards. The guy thought that now he could not only strengthen himself, but also form his own faction. People were scared when they felt a shaking under their feet and thought it was an earthquake. The players couldn't believe what was happening. Were they really returning to the real world? Kieran replied that it was true, because the dungeon had been cleared, and now they were returning home to rest. Riviere warned that the old world would no longer exist, because someone intended to destroy it. Simon Placid asked again if this cruel game had really been created by someone, and Justin froze in surprise. Kieran stated that the rest should give it their all to kill bosses and become stronger. The young man added that people must gather enough strength to crush the creatures that created this game. Simon Placid said they had a duty to protect the real world so that everyone could live in peace and prosperity. Justin Eternus noted that Kieran Riviere delivered a powerful speech that left no one indifferent. The young man saw the silhouette of a man who promised to share his strength with him if he continued to be so good. Kieran Riviere opened his eyes and realized that he had safely escaped the day of confinement and found himself in the real world. The guy who returned to the past hoped that those players would listen to his words in order to save this world. The nurse who entered the boy's room shouted to the doctor that Kieran Riviere had already regained consciousness. The doctor examined him and said that the young man had fully recovered, as his consciousness was clear and his vital signs were normal. The doctor said the boy had been in a coma for 3 days, and hundreds of thousands of people around the world had been left unconscious with him. The doctor said it was a very strange coincidence and asked Kieran Riviere if he knew anything about it. However, the young man who returned to the past ignored the doctor and said that he wanted to see his mother immediately. The doctor said that she fell into a coma on the same day as the young man. She is physically stable but does not regain consciousness. The doctor noted that, from a medical standpoint, Kieran Rivera's mother is currently in a vegetative state. The young man, ranked first in the player rankings, thought that in his past life, his mother had also entered the game in the first wave. Kieran knew that the lockdown system couldn't get everyone into the game at once, so he did it in waves. The guy knew that people who died in this cruel game would forever remain vegetables in the real world. The young man understood that in this new life, his main goal was to protect those closest to him. The guy decided that he had to save his mother from these terrible nightmares and give her a peaceful life. Kieran Riviere looked at the C-rank freedom card he received for finishing first in the world rankings. The boy knew that this card was the only possible chance to leave the deadly game forever. The young man understood that the owner of this C-rank card could enter and exit dungeons on his own. Kieran Riviere declared that his mother would be free, and the doctor asked what the bright light was and what was happening. The doctor couldn't believe his eyes when he looked at the boy and his mother after the flash of bright light. The man asked how this was even possible and thought that the guy had used some kind of magic. Kieran Rivera's mother asked how she ended up in a hospital bed and what was going on. The young man could not resist hugging his mother, thinking that she did not need to know about all the problems of the world. The guy who took first place in contribution points declared that from that day on, his mother was completely safe. Meanwhile, the doctor still could not comprehend what had happened, because this was not an ordinary trick, but something more. At this point, The political elite declared that they had to lure Kieran Riviera to their side. The unknown person added that in the future, this unusual guy could become a full-fledged master of the world. Kieran Rivera's mother told her son that she had actually been to some kind of creepy water park. The guy asked what was happening there, and the woman replied that many creepy creatures were chasing them. The mother of the top-ranked guy added that one of the monsters reached out to her with ugly claws. The woman said that after this, her vision went dark and she passed out, so she doesn't remember anything at all. Kieran's mother, Rivera, added that when she opened her eyes, she saw her boy and a surprise doctor. The woman said that it was a very terrible nightmare, but the young man thought that it was not a dream at all. Kieran Riviera heard his best friend's screams coming from the hospital corridor, clearly looking for him. Placido Vernal shouted joyfully that he had just returned from a game world with very strange rules. Placido added that he was not alone, but with a bunch of people who were pushed through by strong players, a guy and a girl. Kieran Riviera thought his friend's 8th grader syndrome had lingered on indefinitely. The young man at the top of the rankings said that his mother had just woken up, so she needed to rest. Placido Vernal asked if Kieran didn't believe him at all, and stated that that world even had a name. The guy who returned to the past replied that his friend was now talking about the day of imprisonment, which surprised Vernal. Kieran asked if Placido knew that things from that world could be transferred into reality using the system. Kieran Riviera asked his best friend to open the world player contribution rankings to see who the best are. The young man fulfilled his friend's request by contacting the system, which instantly opened the rating for him. Placido Vernal couldn't believe his eyes when he spotted Kieran Rivera at number 1 in the world rankings. The guy who returned to the past said that everything was correct, because it was he who held the first position in the ranking. Placido Vernal said he never imagined his friend would be such a great player on lockdown day. Kieran Riviera said that after he uses one card, his best friend will also receive a notification. The young man contacted the system and stated that he wanted to use the E-rank player class change card. The guy thought that in the game, every profession has colossal power due to the rarity of class change cards. Kieran Riviera knew that the professions were quite weak at the beginning, but their potential was simply limitless. The guy knew that among all professions there are 3 most powerful ones that stand out from the rest. Kieran Riviera was the first to be given the title of Elemental Master, who can control wind, fire, water, and lightning. The young man named the second-class Black Dragon Flame Emperor, which allows one to transform into a dragon. The guy knew that the 3rd most powerful class, Seeker of Wisdom, allows for time travel. Kieran understood that the choice of profession was completely random, so no one knew what the player would ultimately become. The system notified the young man that his class had been successfully changed to Disciple of the Universe. The guy noticed that his profession had 5 stages instead of 3, which significantly increased its difficulty. Kieran thought about how powerful a class he had been given, since even he, a veteran, knew nothing about it. Placido Vernal couldn't believe his eyes when he noticed the system notification about his best friend. The system announced to all players that Kieran Riviera had become the first player in the world to change professions. The young man who returned to the past asked his friend if he really wanted to tell him something. Placido Vernal asked Kieran Riviera to take him with him, in the name of their strong friendship since infancy. The nurse asked the teenagers in the hallway if she had come to them at the wrong time. Kieran Riviera remembered that at that very time, the girl was supposed to arrive demanding payment for the medical ward. The nurse said that Kieran Rivera's mother's deposit for 6 months of stay at their clinic had already been exhausted. The girl added that the guy was currently in debt, and Placido offered to pay part of the debt. Kieran thanked his friend and refused the help, since in the past, he had to work hard for money. The young man decided that in this life, he would bear the burden that had weighed on the shoulders of his dear mother for years. The nurse apologized for having to step out for a moment because her phone rang. The girl answered the call and heard a man's voice, who stated that Kieran Rivera's bill had been paid. The nurse shouted, "Is this really true?" and thought that such news was simply unbelievable. The girl told Kieran that someone had contributed a huge sum for him, enough to live in the clinic for at least 100 years. The nurse added that they had also paid for this patient with a crew cut, and Placido Vernal was taken aback. Kieran's best friend Rivera shouted that he's not crazy at all. He comes here to visit his bro. The boys heard the doctor tell the stranger that Kieran Rivera's room was just down the hall. The man who asked for the player's room number noticed the guys standing near the room he was looking for. The stranger apologized and asked if these guys knew if Mr. Kieran Riviere was here. Placido Vernal asked those who approached them who they were and why they needed Kieran Riviere. The man asked if these young men were Mr. Kieran's friends, and the woman added that they were there on important business. The guy, who is ranked #1 in the international player rankings, thought that he didn't expect to see these faces so soon. The young man mentally added that he knew these influential people from the real world who were also drawn into the game of the gods. Placido Vernal thought that, judging by the way these people were dressed, they were obviously some very important bigwigs. The schizophrenic's best friend decided that they came here because of Kieran, because he is high in the rankings. Placido Vernal added silently that they even paid his hospital bills, even though he wasn't being treated here. The nurse whispered to Kieran that these were the people who had paid for him, so he should be polite. The young man at the top of the rankings thanked the girl for the tip, but he was already aware of what was happening. Kieran Riviere thought there was no point in hiding from these people, so he introduced himself. The leader of the influential people thought that the best player was not at all embarrassed by their presence as expected. Kieran Riviere thought that they were all very influential people in politics and business. The guy thought that Lucien De Luca was a rising political star and a man of power. The young man mentally added that Skylar Berg was the new hegemon in the field of technology and weapons. Kieran Riviere knew that Sophia Grove ran the Transoceanic Corporation and controlled most of the energy resources. The most influential people greeted the young man, but noted that he probably had not heard anything about them. The leader of the Day of Confinement ratings said that he knew perfectly well who they were and suggested getting closer to the point. Lucien De Luca was surprised and wondered if this young boy really already knew about them. Skylar Berg immediately realized that the man who became the first in the world could not be an ordinary man. Sophia Grove thought that this young man turned out to be even more interesting than she had initially expected. The woman suggested that Mr. Kieran follow them, as the corridor was not the best place for conversation. The young man said that they were overcomplicating things and added that he was ready to talk in the chief physician's office. The men simultaneously thought that this guy was no slouch, since he was ready to set his own conditions for them. Lucien De Luca agreed to hold the meeting in the chief physician's office because Kieran Riviere was a valuable man. Sophia Grove thought that the #1 ranked player was not one to hand over the initiative in negotiations. Placido thought his friend had become cool, although recently he didn't even have money to pay for the hospital. Kieran Riviere asked his best friend to grab the guide he was giving him and go to the talk together. Placido Vernal said that there might be difficulties with the guide, and asked if it was necessary to take it with you. Kieran Riviere asked in response if his brother hadn't read that notebook, and Vernal replied that he had thrown it away. The guy with the crew cut thought his sick friend was joking and shouted that he would find her right now. The top-ranked boy thought it was now clear why his friend and mother knew nothing about the dungeon. Sophia Grove asked Mr. Kieran Riviera what kind of survival guide he was talking about. The young man replied that it was just a guide to completing all the initial dungeons of the Day of Imprisonment. People who came to the negotiations were outraged, asking how this was possible, since the game had started several days ago. Kieran Riviere said that whether he was joking now or not, everyone will understand for themselves when his friend brings a notebook with notes. The doctors said that the head physician's office had to be temporarily vacated due to negotiations with some important person. Lucien De Luca exclaimed that these notes indeed spoke of the dungeon he found himself in. The most influential people were at a loss for words, because they were convinced that the boy knew everything about the dungeons. Placido Vernal asked his friend if he had really written reliable information in those notebooks. Kieran Riviere said that if his friend hadn't thrown away his notebooks, he might have also made it into the world rankings. The influential people apologized for the tactlessness and noted that they could not ask the guy to join them. Sophia Grove said that the young man's abilities exceed all expectations, so he reminds them of a prophet. The woman added that she could find no other words to describe what the boy had foreseen on the Day of Imprisonment. The young man at the top of the rankings said that in some sense, he could indeed call himself a prophet. The guy thought that in his past life, it wasn't for nothing that he memorized the forums where players shared their experiences of passing the game. Kieran Riviere mentally added that the efforts from his past life would become a powerful trump card in his fight against the gods. The young man decided not to postpone the important dialogue and immediately asked the influential people what they wanted from him. Lucian DeLuca, Skylar Berg, and Sophia Grove looked at each other to see if they had the same thoughts about this guy. The most influential people said that they needed Mr. Kieran's help in everything related to the day of confinement. Lucian DeLuca remarked that he was too afraid to feel his life hanging by a thread. Skylar Berg added that with Mr. Kieran's support, things won't go so badly in the next dungeon. Sophia Grove said that they would definitely be sucked into the day of confinement again, and they really don't want to die. Placido Vernal wondered what his best friend's answer would be, because this was a very big opportunity to become famous. Lucian said that if Lord Kieran agreed, they would fulfill any of his conditions, whatever they might be. The young man who returned to the past said that he could very well become a consultant to these influential people. Placido Vernal mentally admired his friend, who, in his opinion, looked incredibly cool. Kieran Rivera's best friend thought that the boy's family was barely making ends meet, and that he needed money now. Placido Vernal mentally decided that his friend would ask for money, because it was the most valuable thing in the world. The young man added that in that case they would no longer have to work, and would only be left to squander money. Kieran Riviere said these influential people must fulfill 3 simple conditions to work with him. Placido Vernal couldn't believe his ears, because his friend had just turned 1 wish into 3 at once. The influential people exclaimed that even if the guy had 300 wishes, they would agree to fulfill them all. Placido Vernal realized with horror that his best friend had significantly undersold the number of wishes he had requested. Kieran Riviere said his first condition would be the public distribution of his guide notebooks. Lucian DeLuca asked if the young man really wanted to just hand over this life-saving information to the players. Skylar Berg noted that the commercial value of such a brochure exceeded any expectations of the guy. Sophia Grove added that the game is incredibly dangerous, so such information would be highly valuable. Kieran Riviere said he was giving this incredibly valuable information to these influential people for free. Lucian DeLuca acknowledged the incredible generosity of the guy who predicted the events in the starting dungeons. The guy who returned to the past noticed that his goals were different, in that he wanted to save not only the rich. Kieran Riviere added that if these influential people do not agree with him, then they have nothing more to talk about. The big shots looked at each other and thought that even the big prophet had not swayed the guy, and that was very valuable. Influential people said they would spread this information around the world as soon as possible. The young man added that Lucian, Skylar, and Sophia should establish a player affairs department in their own names. Influential people responded that they would take control of the players so that they would not disrupt the lives of ordinary people. Kieran Riviere agreed with the need to act quickly, and said there was 1 final condition remaining. Influential people became wary because the last condition was supposed to be the most difficult to fulfill. Placido Vernal froze in the hope that his friend would ask for an incomparable amount of money for a comfortable life. Kieran Riviere said he needed a home because living in a mental hospital wasn't very healthy. The young man added that he wants his mother to live a normal life in her own, albeit small house. The influential people were taken aback and asked if this was all Mr. Kieran wanted for his work as a consultant. Placido Vernal realized that his best friend was not a very smart guy, since he did not want to be rich. Kieran Riviere said that if this was too much to ask, he could continue to live in the hospital. The trio of influential people exclaimed that they agreed with the last condition 1,000,000%. Kieran Riviere agreed with the upper crust and asked them not to react so violently. Lucian, Skylar, and Sophia apologized for not being able to maintain their composure in the face of such a proposal. DeLuca wondered why, of all 3 conditions, the last one was the easiest to fulfill. Berg decided that this was the best way to win the trust of the player ranked #1 in the international rankings. Grove thought that her comrades would definitely try to steal this chance from her, but she would not allow it. Kieran Riviere said he still had some things to do and needed to return to his room. The young man declared in conclusion that the countdown to the next day of confinement was about to begin. The world's most influential people couldn't believe their ears when they realized the guy was talking about another game. A moment later, the system notified players that the countdown to the next day of confinement had begun. Kieran Riviere said he would write a guide for the next stage once the other side had met all the conditions. Lucian, Skylar, and Sophia replied that they would immediately order the immediate fulfillment of the boy's wishes. The players, who had set up a meeting room in the head doctor's office, heard someone trying to break through security. One of Skylar Berg's subordinates reported to the master that some girl was trying to break through. The man shouted that his people should not let in strangers, even if they were important officials. The security guard noticed that the girl was talking about dating Mr. Kieran Riviere. The most influential people could not believe that they had just had every chance of ruining their relationship with the strongest player. Placido Vernal cursed and screamed, asking when his best friend had managed to get a girlfriend. Kieran Riviere has claimed that his friend talks too much nonsense because he is not dating anyone. An unknown person burst into the head doctor's office, saying that she hadn't seen her beloved for a long time. Placido Vernal asked himself how this girl had the nerve to come here with such words. Sophia Grove wondered if this could be Mr. Kieran's girlfriend, and they looked good together. The world #1 tennis player said he now understands who claimed to be his girlfriend. The guy who returned to the past remembered how this girl called him a psycho who had no right to love her. Kieran Riviere would never forget the laugh the creature had made as it mocked him for his false diagnosis. The young man thought that during his school years, everyone thought that he was in love with her, although he himself considered her only a friend. The girl said that she brought these flowers for Kieran Rivera and admitted that she was wrong before. Skylar noticed that the guy was looking at the girl who came in not at all like she was his girlfriend. Could she really be an imposter? Placido shouted that this girl had no right to speak to Kieran after she publicly humiliated him. The girl who burst into the office remarked that they were young and stupid back then. But now, she realized her mistake. Kieran Riviere said she only came here because she happened to see the world rankings of players. Everyone in the room instantly put 2 and 2 together and figured out what was happening. Sophia Grove realized that this girl was actually a very materialistic person who decided to take advantage of the guy. The girl stated that Kieran Riviere still loves her, even though she once rejected him. Placido Vernal was indignant, because the woman who had insulted his friend had not chosen her words carefully to humiliate him. The young man at the top of the international rankings asked his brother not to shout in the hospital, but to just leave. Kieran Riviere noted that he had always considered this girl only a friend because he had never liked her. The girl said that she would become Kieran Rivera's girlfriend if he agreed to help her get through the day of lockdown. The one who once publicly humiliated a player from the top line of the ratings screamed that she would not let Kieran go. Skylar Berg's subordinates immediately closed the passage so that the girl could not leave the head doctor's office. The girl, who introduced herself as Kieran Rivera's lover, ordered the security guards to let her in to see the guy immediately. The unknown woman was indignant. Did these men really not understand her feelings? How could they not let her go to Kieran? Sophia noticed that Kieran did not want to communicate with this lady, so she asked the security to escort her out. The girl screamed that she was Kieran Rivera's woman and that they had to let her go immediately. Placido Vernal exclaimed that it was simply awesome because he had long wanted to teach that nasty girl a lesson. The guy at the top of the ranking thought that, according to his memories, Faustina should be in her mother's room. The young man who returned to the past could not believe his eyes when he entered his mother's room. Kieran Riviere saw his beloved, whom he was unable to protect in his past life. The boy's mother asked him to come over, and Faustina said that she had come to help because she had nothing else to do. The young man, who took first place in the international player rankings, said that he had not seen Faustina for a long time. The girl asked what this meant, since she had visited him not long ago, or had he already forgotten? The guy remembered how he said goodbye to Faustina in his past life. She then said that Kieran must survive. Kieran Riviere thought that in this life he would never again allow the people he cared about to die in the day of imprisonment. Faustina couldn't understand why the guy suddenly decided to hug her so tightly. Could it really be that he was feeling worse? Placido wondered if Kieran and Faustina were really friends because they looked very suspicious. That night, the young man who returned to the past could not sleep because he was thinking about how to become stronger. The young man thought that the hospital had transferred him and his mother to a better ward due to the influence of Lucien DeLuca and the others. Kieran looked at the timer in the system and realized that he had only 63 hours left until the day of confinement. The boy knew that after changing classes, he received the weapon resonance skill, which made him feel everything differently. The young man mentally added that now, when he touched an object and activated the skill, it was as if he was analyzing the object. Kieran Riviere thought that over time he was beginning to understand the structure of the object he touched. The guy at the top of the ranking now knew for sure that the second bolt on the leg of his bed was about to fall off. Kieran Riviere was disappointed that the hospital had no weapons at all that he could learn with a skill. The young man heard a voice he had known since birth. It said that the boy had received the right to become a god. Kieran Riviere asked who was talking to him anyway, and added what kind of right this unknown person was talking about. The stranger replied that the boy would find out who he was in due time. But right now, it didn't make much sense to him. The dark silhouette added that the young man could decide whether to take the test of the true God or not. The young man instantly realized that hidden in these trials would be the power that would help him defeat the gods. The guy realized that now he had a $1 million chance, so he simply had no right to refuse to participate. Kieran Riviere declared that he would easily pass the stranger's test, and suggested that he begin right away. The silhouette of the man who called himself a true god exclaimed that he had not expected any other decision from the guy. The unknown person added that if the boy did not pass his test, he would remain locked in empty space forever. Kieran Riviere thought that he had never encountered such a power, so divine and mysterious. The young man added that he now wondered what the reward would be for taking the risk of remaining in this space forever. The guy heard someone unknown announce the completion of the formation of the testing space. Kieran Riviere thought it looked something like the system notification that appears when you connect to a game. The young man who took first place in the ranking of players on the day of confinement thought that there was nothing here. Kieran soon noticed a giant palace, which was quite far from where he appeared. The guy noticed that the dark silhouette that had directed him here had decided to follow him. The unknown person said that the guy had to kill the enemy in 10 minutes, and then he would be able to return to reality. The dark shadow added in conclusion that possessing all-seeing wisdom was the only way to victory in this battle. Someone who wished to remain anonymous stated that from this moment on, the trial of Kieran Rivera is declared open. The young man who agreed to the god's test noticed that the silhouette of a man unknown to him appeared ahead. The boy saw that he was about to fight an eyeless oathkeeper, who was immune to damage. Kieran Riviere wondered if this monster was his opponent, even though he was considered the strongest swordsman. The young man who returned to the past thought that a duel between the strongest player and the master swordsman would be very interesting. The unknown person who proposed this test to the boy said that he would give Kieran Riviere a weapon for this fight. The player at the top of the rankings thought that he just wanted to try out his new skill, weapon resonance. However, the system informed the young man that this object was not real, so resonance was impossible. Kieran Riviere realized that his skill only worked on physical objects, and that this sword was just a clever illusion. The guy who returned to the past said that he would pass this test in one fell swoop, because why waste time? The player shouted that he wanted to see the true power of the one who is recognized as the strongest swordsman in the trial of God. Kieran Riviere admitted that the eyeless oathkeeper is indeed a very formidable opponent. The young man realized that he had to immediately prepare for the next blow to avoid getting injured. The guy thought that fighting someone who could change stances with a two-handed sword so quickly was unbearably difficult. Kieran Riviere immediately noticed that the eyeless oathkeeper had once again changed his stance. The world #1 ranked player thought it was definitely the stance of a swordsman ready to deliver a fatal blow. The youth who agreed to the test of the true god dodged to avoid the enemy's incredible skill. Kieran thought it was a very powerful blow, but because of this, the sword master involuntarily exposed himself to a counterattack. The boy who returned to the past realized that the strongest swordsman was as much an illusion as his sword. The young man realized that killing the eyeless oathkeeper would not present any psychological difficulty for him. Kieran Riviere decided that by slitting the throat of this unreal sword master, he would easily complete the test. The strongest player of the day of imprisonment mentally added that such a wound would be fatal for anyone. However, the boy instantly remembered that the strongest swordsman was completely immune to any kind of damage. The young man realized that the system's warning was literal, and realized that he had gotten into a big mess by agreeing to the fight. Kieran Riviere realized that the swordmaster simply could not be killed by conventional methods. The guy thought that he would have to find another way to get rid of the strongest swordsman in the remaining time. The young man seriously thought about how he would be able to defeat someone who is immune to all types of damage. Kieran Riviere thought that the stranger's last words could not have been in vain, which meant that it was a hint. The world #1 player thought the skull behind his enemy had been staring at him the whole time. The young man realized that the immortal eyeless oathkeeper was desperately trying to protect the skull behind his back. Kieran Riviere mentally exclaimed that his opponent had sworn an oath to protect the man behind him at any cost. The guy who returned to the past was happy, because now he clearly understood what he had to do in this fight. The stranger thought that this worthless guy was still not worthy of receiving his blessing. The man added that Kirin Riviera did not have a sword technique capable of killing the strongest swordsman. Meanwhile, the young man once again attacked the eyeless Oathkeeper in order to make his plans come true. The young man realized that if his guess was correct, this immortal warrior would commit suicide with his own hands. The stranger was surprised that the guy did not cut down the swordmaster himself, but at the same time opened the enemy's eyes. The guy said that the eyeless Oathkeeper should look behind his back, because there has been a skeleton hanging there for a long time. The strongest swordmaster decided to trust the parvenu, who threw away his sword to show his non-hostility. The eyeless Oathkeeper realized with horror that the young man was right, because behind him hung a real skeleton. The man, immune to any damage, screamed in pain as his oath no longer made sense. Kirin Riviere realized he had made the right choice when he decided to consider the stranger's words. The young man exclaimed that the answer was obvious, because the Oathkeeper could not be killed in battle. The guy added that the unknown person gave him the weapon at the very beginning only to confuse him. Kirin Riviere declared that he could not be mistaken and demanded an answer from the one who had been hiding in the fog all this time. The creator of this dimension replied that the simpler the truth, the more difficult it is to discern. But the guy succeeded. The Dark Shadow stated that this was why she was granting the young man her true blessing, because Kirin had earned it. The young man thought it was a divine blessing and asked himself what effect he would receive from the stranger. The guy ranked first in the international rankings felt an unknown force envelop his body. The unknown person said that Kirin Riviere should immediately prepare for his real test. The young man who had returned to the past asked if another test awaited him and what it all meant. The true God replied that the boy must withstand the pressure of the source of his power in order to receive the blessing. The unknown person added that Kirin Riviere must feel the mental impact of all living beings. God added that pain, joy, anger, and sorrow are the prayers of billions of souls that the boy must endure. The young man who had agreed to the test of the true God realized that the ground beneath his feet had suddenly shattered into pieces. The guy who returned to the past realized that he was sent to the underworld to test the strength of his soul. Kirin Riviere screamed because he could not bear the feelings of the souls that were trapped in this cursed place. The young man suddenly realized that the true source of divine power is the faith of all people on earth. The boy who agreed to test the true God mentally added that he was frightened by the true power of this force. However, the next moment the guy thought that if this continued, he would not be able to restrain himself. The young man added that he was already finding it difficult to control his laughter because he had acquired such an incredibly powerful force. The guy thought that now he would be able to fight back against the evil gods who invaded the earth with their own rules. The true God thought that now would be the last and most powerful blow, which no mortal could withstand. Kirin Riviere felt as if his body was literally at the very center of an explosion of incredible power. The stranger mentally asked himself if the guy they had chosen had really broken down because of the last blow. However, almost immediately the true deity realized that the young man had managed to survive and stay on his feet. Kirin Riviere stated that there was nothing special about this test, and the true God exaggerated its difficulty. The stranger exclaimed that the young man had earned his blessing and asked the boy to remember his name for a long time. The dark silhouette added that once Kirin was acknowledged by others, he would be granted absolute blessing. The young man who had returned to the past asked what all this meant and what this absolute blessing was. Kirin Riviere exclaimed that the true God had not yet revealed his name and asked how he would be able to remember his name. The guy jumped out of his hospital bed, saying what a blessing the unknown deity had bestowed upon him. The system informed Kirin that he had gained absolute immunity to any mental influence abilities. The young man noticed the name Seraphim Gabriel in the system window and realized that this was the deity that remained unnamed. Kirin thought that now he was interested in seeing the rest of the true gods that Seraphim Gabriel had spoken of. The best player of the day of confinement could not believe that his schizophrenia all this time had been the voices of the true gods. The boy realized that the power to save the world had been hidden in his own diagnosis from the very beginning. Placido shouted that the programmers had made an app with a video version of the day of confinement countdown. Kirin asked his best friend not to shout so loudly because they were now in a psychiatric hospital. The young man with the crew cut exclaimed that these craftsmen had even put together a realistic simulation of the dungeon. Kieran Rivera's mother thought Placido Vernal was getting along very well with her son, despite his illness. The schizophrenic praised influential people for releasing hundreds of educational videos on the day of confinement in just 2 days. The young man couldn't believe that Lucian had already teamed up with the government and created a bureau for player affairs. The top player looked at the rankings and was convinced that his colossal lead would not be surpassed anytime soon. The guy asked himself if his guides would help other players understand the basic principles of dungeons. The nurse said that Mr. Kieran needed to look out the window because a real motorcade had arrived to see him. Placido Vernal ran to the window and shouted that those bigwigs had indeed sent a whole motorcade after Kieran Riviere. The young man with a crew cut couldn't believe his eyes when he saw crowds of security guards and a huge limousine. Placido Vernal exclaimed that Lucian, Skylar, and Sophia were well prepared for their meeting with Kieran. Sophia Grove asked the impressionable boy to tell Mr. Kieran that they had completed the third task. Placido shouted that these three had actually driven a whole motorcade with an unrealistic number of guards after Kieran. The young man who ranked first in the international rankings wondered if rich people really loved to put on such a show. Kieran Rivera's mother said they should never get involved with crime under any circumstances. Placido asked his aunt why she thought that, and Kieran asked her to calm down because he was not breaking the law. The young man added that he was actually saving the world, which made his mother and nurse even more worried. The best player thought that sooner or later everyone would find out about it. But now they didn't need to go into details. Lucian De Luca introduced Kieran Rivera to his estate, which he had been saving for special occasions such as this. The man added that the residence is guarded 24 hours a day and that maids look after the property. Placido Vernal couldn't believe his ears, because such a mansion must have cost some exorbitant amount of money. Lucian noted that this was his property, so there were no similar offers on the open market. The guy with the crew cut shouted that this residence was one of a kind. Kieran said he wanted to look at other options, and De Luca noted that the gentleman's tastes were too high. Placido Vernal cried out indignantly, wondering if such a huge mansion would be enough for his best friend. Skylar stated that if Mr. Kieran Riviere didn't like Lucian's house, he had a chance to win. The man noted that no hot guy could refuse the house he had chosen for the young man. Skylar added that a place with a view of the entire city would be ideal for such a young man. Placido shouted in amazement that this panoramic window actually offered a view of the entire Heineberg. The young man with the crew cut couldn't stop. This place really impressed his playful imagination. Skylar stated that the building was designed by a famous architect and is a famous landmark. The man in business attire added that this apartment was the best penthouse in the entire building. Skylar Berg said that that was not all, because he had prepared something very tempting for Mr. Kieran. Placido Vernal wondered what could be more tempting than such a luxurious apartment, and the man gave the signal. Skylar Berg said he personally selected a dozen first-class maids for Mr. Kieran. The guy with the crew cut shouted that he had never seen so many beauties who looked like real goddesses. The maids said they were ready to fulfill any wish of the most handsome master in the world, Kieran. Lucian De Luca and Sophia Grove wondered why they hadn't thought of something like this. It was brilliant. Skylar Berg thought that no guy could resist such a crowd of devoted maids. However, Kieran Riviere said he wanted to see the next house and thought all the offers were terrible. Skylar Berg couldn't believe his eyes. Was the guy ranked #1 really that impenetrable? Sophia Grove thought that Mr. Kieran was indeed an unusual person, standing out from the crowd. Lucian De Luca thought he still had a chance, since the young man had refused the second house offered to him. Sophia said she chose a house without unnecessary luxury, but she sincerely hopes that Kieran will like it. The woman added that she made inquiries to find out about the background of Kieran Riviere and his mother. Sophia Grove asked the world #1 ranked player if he was familiar with the place. Placido Vernal said this was the same house that had to be sold to treat Kieran Rivera's illness. Lucian De Luca and Skylar Berg realized that their partner had decided to play a trump card by pressing on the boy's memories. The woman added that over the years the apartment had changed owners several times, and its layout had undergone changes. Sophia Grove said she tried to restore it to its original appearance and make it as cozy as possible. The guy thought that she really approached the matter with soul and created the atmosphere almost like in his memories. Kieran thanked Sophia and said that the house suited him, and the woman replied that she was pleased to be of service. Lucien DeLuca and Skylar Berg couldn't believe they had lost so badly to this devious woman. The guy who returned to the past asked his friend to get a notebook with notes about the second stage of the game, Day of Imprisonment. Sophia Grove asked if this was the information they had been carrying out Kieran Riviere's orders for. Placido Vernal said his friend had been writing guides for the upcoming Day of Lockdown dungeons for the past few days. The woman couldn't believe that this guy carried such valuable information in the waistband of his pants. Sophia Grove asked if Mr. Kieran wanted to release this information to the public as well. The young man replied that this was not necessary, and clarified that they could pass on these guides to anyone they considered strong. The guy added that in Day of Lockdown, players will have to become stronger on their own to complete the game. Kieran Riviere noted that even with these records, the lucky ones won't be able to get very far in this tricky game. The youngster added that they need to select outstanding players to help them adapt to the rules. The guy at the top of the rankings said that such people will make their own way to the top. Sophia Grove asked why Mr. Kieran needed to select the strongest players of the Day of Confinement. The young man who returned to the past declared that together they must save this world from the monstrous threat of the dungeons. Sophia Grove noticed that Mr. Kieran Riviere's thoughts were indeed hovering at a height beyond their reach. The next day, with only minutes left on the countdown timer, Placido announced that he was ready. The guy at the top of the rankings asked his mother not to worry because he would be back very soon. Kieran's best friend, Rivera, told his aunt that they were going to another world for an adventure. The mother of the boy who returned to the past thought that Placido Vernal had played too much with her son. The system notified players that the countdown had ended and wished them a pleasant game on lockdown day. Kieran told his friend that he would not take him with him, because this time, he had to go into the dungeon himself. Placido Vernal stated that after completing this dungeon, he too will be included in the ranking of players around the world. The guy at the top of the world rankings thought that his second dungeon hadn't changed at all. The young man mentally added that, just like in his previous life, the second dungeon was the apartments of fierce cold. The system notified players that they needed to find and defeat a boss to complete the dungeon. The guy thought that the system was misleading players again, because finding the boss here would be difficult. The young man added that true rules require the player to have a reliable companion, since there are two bosses at once. Kieran knew that the bosses of the upper and lower floors had to be pitted against each other in order to progress. The guy at the top of the ranking thought that the memories of betrayal were still fresh in his mind. Riviere added mentally that he therefore had to call upon the only reliable person he knew. The system notified the young man that he had successfully activated the effect of the special card squad formation. A young man with no reliable friends summoned his beloved to the dungeon of the apartments of fierce cold. Faustina asked Kieran Riviera what he was doing here and why everything had suddenly changed so much. The girl added, "Did she really find herself in some strange, unusual place again?" The guy replied that it was he who invited Faustina, who had just been reading the system notifications on the island. The young man remembered well that during his second stage, the girl had just entered the starting dungeon. Kieran Riviere knew that it was that island that had caused her psychological trauma, causing her to suffer for the rest of her life. The guy added that his goal was to change the fate of his beloved, because he does not want to see her suffer. The girl asked how Kieran Riviere knew that she had just been on the Big Island. Faustina was surprised when she saw that the D-rank dungeon greeted her with a welcoming notice. Kieran Rivera's girlfriend said it was very similar to the video that is currently trending online. The young man calmly answered the girl that this place was called the Day of Imprisonment dungeon. Kieran Riviere added that he needed an absolutely reliable battle companion, which is why he chose Faustina. The system alerted players that the countdown to the opening of the dungeon doors had successfully begun. The guy said that behind these doors the girl would see terrible monsters, and asked if she would become his comrade. Faustina thought that this scene reminded her of their first meeting, when they were still very little. Kieran's beloved Rivera realized that the young man extended his hand to her, just like that time. Faustina remembered that he then suggested that they play together, so that she wouldn't feel so lonely and sad. The girl was then happy that someone paid attention to her and invited her to play something together. Faustina accepted the boy's offer without hesitation, and he was surprised by the smile of the girl opposite him. Kieran Rivera's girlfriend told the guy that this time too she saw no reason to refuse the young man. The player at the top of the rankings asked the woman he invited if she had forgotten his words and remembered everything. Faustina said that the guy shouldn't worry because she remembered everything about the game Apartments of the Deadly Cold. The girl added that monsters could appear anywhere here, so she shouldn't touch anything without asking. Kieran's girlfriend Rivera said it wasn't just an apartment, but a real multi-level labyrinth. Faustina added that to complete it, you need to force the bosses of the upper and lower floors to meet. The top-ranked players said that the girl is really smart. Now he knows that they are ready to open the door. Faustina stated that she would try very hard to become a good partner to him who would not let him down. The system notified the game participants that all rooms with players were unlocked, and the game had begun. Faustina said it was incredibly cold here, and Kieran noted that the stat cards could help the girl. The young man at the top of the rankings said that he knew where to find them and asked his beloved to wait a little. Riviere noticed the traitor and thought that even his appearance coincided with memories from a past life. The stranger shouted, asking why it was so cold here, and added that he didn't want to run into a monster. The guy with the short haircut loudly exclaimed that he didn't expect to see real living people in this freezing cold. The stranger was glad that he had managed to find players who could help him so quickly. Kieran Riviere thought that at first glance this guy seemed honest and decent, so it was easy to trust him. The young man who returned to the past this time knew that this bastard could not be trusted under any circumstances. Kieran remembered well that in every battle this coward hid behind his back, building up the image of a weakling. Riviere then decided that with time the guy would get used to the dangers, but the stranger acted reliably. The young man at the top of the rankings remembered that when he managed to defeat the boss, this creature attacked from behind. Kieran Riviere knew that this scum had betrayed him without hesitation for the sake of some measly D-rank stat cards. The guy who returned to the past understood that he almost died then, but the world is not without good people ready to help. The stranger said that the place was very creepy and suggested that they stick together to cover each other. The guy with the short hair thought that he would finish off this loser at the right opportunity and take his chick. Kieran thought he could give him a chance to think again before betraying him again. The stranger mentally added that this young man's sword was also good. In any case, better than the old dagger. The guy with the short haircut said that they shouldn't be shy, because in this stupid game they need to team up. Kieran Riviere thought that in the past this bastard had stabbed him in the back, and now he had returned the favor. The stranger couldn't believe that he had stumbled upon a player who, like him, was ready to kill for the sake of survival. The young man at the top of the rankings mentally added that he wouldn't kill the bastard, but would leave him to die. The guy who was ranked first asked if Faustina wanted to ask him something. The girl replied that there were reasons for every action Kieran Rivera took, so she had no questions. The young man who returned to the past said that they would go and get Faustina some stat cards. The unknown person approached the wounded man and thought that the guy's appearance matched the information received. The man didn't believe that Kieran could attack a person without reason, since he had previously helped newcomers for free. Perseus Estel decided that Riviere deserved his close attention because of his unpredictability. After some time, the guy from the first place in the ranking knocked down one of the doors to meet the first monster. Faustina screamed in fear that the creature was looking straight at them and asked if it was really going to attack. The system warned players that they had encountered a D-rank hanged frost ghoul. The dangerous monster screamed that it would kill these pathetic people to satisfy its incredible hunger. The young man's beloved asked him to do something. Otherwise, they would die because of this terrible creature. The D-rank monsters saw that the players were in no hurry to do anything, so it decided that they were simply weak. However, the young man at the top of the rankings ordered this monster to shut its mouth and not make any more noise. The guy who returned to the past decided that this creature had gotten away with too much, so he threw her away. Faustina couldn't believe her eyes when she saw how easily her boyfriend threw the hanged ghoul aside. The girl asked if Kieran Riviere always dealt with the monsters from the game's dungeons so easily. The young man replied that not all the opponents here were strong, since this particular ghoul turned out to be especially weak. Faustina thought that they would have to fight stronger monsters just like in the movies. Kieran Riviere asked the girl to take the acquired characteristic card in her hands and think that she wanted to activate it. The best player's girlfriend mentally added that it was unlikely that a movie monster would be found in these apartments. The girl asked herself how exactly she should think in order to activate this characteristic card. Faustina was surprised when she saw that the map she had received from Kieran Riviera had disappeared right in her hands. The top-ranking boy said she was a very quick learner and suggested they find another monster. The girl thought that after receiving the characteristics, the cold really stopped feeling so acutely. Faustina asked why Kieran Riviere was so good at this game, whether he really liked it that much. The best player's girlfriend, seeing the young man's reaction, realized that she had asked this question in vain. The guy, the only player left from the day of lockdown in the past, didn't know how to answer this question. Faustina asked if she had just asked a question that was too personal. Kieran replied that there was no fun in this game and asked the girl to remember that he had only one goal. The world #1 ranked player added that he wants to destroy this damn game. The girl thought that she didn't understand the reasons, but if Kieran wanted this, then he had reasons for it. The Frost Ghoul decided that now was the time to pounce on the girl who was thinking about something. The young man at the top of the day of imprisonment player rankings thought he couldn't be fooled by such a trick. The guy who returned to the past mentally added that he would not allow this mob to harm his girlfriend. Kieran Riviere easily crushed the neck of the pathetic monster, who couldn't even escape the guy's grip. The young man said that, unfortunately, the monster did not drop a card, and this was all due to the difficulty of the D-rank dungeon. The guy at the top of the ranking added that regular monsters don't guarantee cards like bosses. Players outside the walls of Kieran Riviera and Faustina's corridor shouted that it was more of a labyrinth than an apartment. People who were forcibly dragged into this dungeon complained that they couldn't even find the passage to the next floor. The leader's girlfriend thought her boyfriend was incredibly cool because he didn't get lost in this labyrinth. Kieran stated that the biting cold apartments are not cold at the start, but the temperature gradually drops. The young man added that if they don't find the boss of this floor, the passage to the next one will never open. The guy who went back in time said that everyone would eventually die of frostbite in this labyrinth. The girl asked if all the players who entered this dungeon would freeze to death. Kieran Riviere added that each subsequent floor will become one level colder. The young man at the top of the rankings thought that the boss of this floor must be somewhere near this place. Perseus thought that every action the guy had taken so far had a specific purpose. So where was he heading now? Estelle mentally added that the system didn't give any clues about the exit from the dungeon. So did Kieran really have a plan? A person following the leader of the ratings thought that the creator of guides for beginners had special abilities. After some time wandering through the corridors of the apartments of the bitter cold, Riviere found the boss's room. The young man who returned to the past thought that the starting boss should be here and have excellent camouflage. The world #1 player heard someone behind him call out to him in a dismissive tone. The red-haired guy asked if he had really met the real Kieran Riviere. Faustina asked if this was someone her boyfriend knew, and he replied that he didn't remember such friends. The unknown person shouted that he, by the way, was no pushover either, since his name was in the world player rankings. Perseus Estel asked himself where this guy stood if he was allowing himself to talk to Kieran like that. Riviere said he didn't remember the young man's face, which meant he couldn't even climb into the top 100. The stranger called the top player an arrogant bastard and added that he was ranked 800th. Faustina said that this guy shouldn't be proud of his 800th place, because it's just a game. Perseus Estel thought that this irritating idiot was only preventing the leader of the rating from acting according to his plan. Kieran asked the 800th what he needed, and he shouted that for them, he was a young master. The stranger added with a shout that he had come to challenge for first place, to show everyone the true leader. The young man replied that his first place was not the result of blind luck, as the screaming guy thought. The boys' comrades couldn't believe their eyes when they saw Kieran Riviere knock their boss away with one slap. The young man who returned to the past asked the 800th to step aside, because he was getting in the way under his feet. The guy who claimed to be young Master Kieran shouted that he did not allow the guy to leave. The unknown person added that his gang would quickly deal with the leader of the ratings, who must be full of valuables. The 800th declared that if Kieran Riviere turned away from him, he would instantly receive 100 blows. The young man at the top of the rankings thought he was dealing with unusual idiots and incorrigible scoundrels. The guy who returned to the past thought that he would have to teach this self-proclaimed master a lesson. Kieran Riviere declared that he would give the stranger a good lesson on behalf of his elders using a doorknob. The young man mentally added that a little noise would be just right for him, since it would allow him to lure out the boss. The system notified the guy that his weapon resonance skill had been successfully applied to the door handle. The young man at the top of the ranking added that this was a great opportunity to test his class skill. The guy saw the characteristics of the E-rank trash weapon and realized that his skill had independently assessed the pen. 800th shouted that he wanted to resolve everything amicably, but now he realized that Kieran had asked for trouble himself. The guy who returned to the past thought that this red-haired guy was making an incredible amount of noise without a fight. The stranger shouted to his guys that they should pounce on this owner of cool cards. However, the 800's gang were in no hurry to attack Kieran Riviera because they were aware of his abilities. The red-haired man screamed, asking if these idiots had really decided to throw him to the mercy of this young man. The frightened guys from the 800th asked the boss if he himself understood who he was trying to set them on. The unknown person replied that he didn't care about that guy's position in the rankings because he had insulted him, and that was unforgivable. The red-haired man shouted that this guy, Kieran Riviere, was just a dud, a stepping stone to his glory. The young man who had returned to the past knew that to make more noise, he would have to hit this idiot back. The guy at the top of the list said that this guy was being too reckless to make so much noise. The 800th realized that this young man was trying to humiliate him in public. It simply couldn't be any other way. The red-haired man screamed that he was in incredible pain from Kieran Riviera hitting him with that door handle. The young man's brothers, who demanded to be called Young Master, could not believe their eyes when they saw his tears. The top-ranked boy realized that this guy was shouting loud enough for the boss to hear him. A moment later, Kieran Riviere saw how a huge vine grabbed hold of a red-haired boy screaming in pain. The 800th person in the ranking queue couldn't believe that such a monstrous monster was somewhere nearby. The young man realized that this damn vine would now drag him straight into the monster's mouth, and no one would help him. The red-haired man's boys shouted that they must immediately rush to the aid of their young master. Faustina asked her boyfriend what had just happened and why that strange vine had grabbed hold of the upstart. Kieran Riviere replied that it was the dungeon boss and added that by killing him, they would be able to leave the floor. The young man who returned to the past asked his beloved to follow him and clarified that she did not need to hurry. The girl realized that next to Kieran, she felt completely safe, like next to a superhero. Faustina added silently that the outstanding players of the day of confinement could also become real superheroes. Kieran Rivera's girlfriend admitted to herself that she was in complete shock about what was happening. But it was great. Perseus Estelle thought it was no wonder this guy was at the top of the player rankings. The young man who decided to follow Kieran added that fighting alongside such a player would be extremely risky. A crowd of the 800's comrades chased after the tied-up boss, shouting that the monster must immediately free him. The red-haired man's guys loudly added that this bastard would pay for daring to touch their boss. The upstart's comrades shouted that now they would definitely not spare this creature that refused to stop. The middle-floor boss of the apartments of the Fierce Cold thought that these little people had come into his mouth on their own. The monster pounced without mercy on the players who were desperately trying to catch up with their leader. The red-haired guys realized that the monsters in this dungeon were head and shoulders above the monsters from the starting one. The system notified players that they had encountered an E-rank boss, Mutated Man-Eating Flower. A young man who wanted to become the best player realized that he was about to be torn apart by the monster's endless teeth. The red-haired man noticed that humanity's strongest player was already standing near this dangerous monster. The guy instantly recognized Kieran Riviera and noticed that the young man from the top of the rankings was not at all afraid of the monster. 800th wondered if humanity's best player was really going to save a scoundrel like him. The young man who returned to the past thought that he had no right to lose a person from the ranking, even a low one. The guy from the first line of the ranking attacked an E-rank boss, who was even inferior to him in characteristics. Kieran Riviere easily slammed Pax Sapiens into the massive bulk of the first boss of the apartments of the Bitter Cold. The red-haired man couldn't believe that the guy from the top spot in the rankings saved him from certain death. The young man, determined to destroy the evil gods, thought that the 800th could make a good ally. The boy saved by Kieran Riviere thought that being saved by him was even more painful than death itself. The strongest player in humanity said that it was time for the 800th to get up, because he had to survive in this game. Kieran Riviere said that when the red-haired man enters the top 10, he will be ready to fight him on equal terms. The guy who declared himself a young gentleman realized that the leader of the ratings turned out to be an incredible person. Evander Evil introduced himself, declared that he would definitely be in the top 10, and thanked his savior. Kieran Riviere thought that, like in his past life, after killing the boss, a path opened up. But why two at once? The system gave the young man at the top of the rankings a choice: to ascend to the mutants or descend to the dead. Faustina said that the guy was very fast, and he looked at the timer during which he had to choose a path. Rivera's beloved exclaimed that they had two options to choose from, and asked what Kieran had chosen. Evander Evil suggested that both options seemed creepy to the girl, and she replied that everything was not so bad. Faustina thought that monsters were waiting for them above and ghosts below. Both options incredibly exciting. The girl thought that she shouldn't show that she liked all this. Otherwise, Kieran would think that she was crazy. The guy at the top of the ranking asked his beloved which of these paths she liked more. Faustina realized that this was an incredibly difficult choice, because she really wanted to see both. Perseus Estel asked Mr. Kieran to take his time and asked if he could join the boys' group. The man who approached introduced himself and noted that he was ranked 30th, so he would be useful. Kieran said that the one following them had finally shown up and thought that 30th place sounded very significant. Evander Evil thought he would quickly get into the top 10, and some 30th place is not an achievement at all. The guy at the top of the rankings thought that he had already noticed Perseus, but he didn't understand why he was following him. Kieran Riviere added silently that he didn't want to expose Estelle because he was the one who saved him in his past life. The man who approached asked the guy at the very top of the rankings if he had really noticed him from the very beginning. Kieran Riviere remembered that back then, after that bastard's betrayal, he thought that this was the end for him. However, Perseus Estel praised his abilities and said that the boy perfectly suited his requirements. The young man's savior told him that he must obey his orders in everything in order to get out of this dungeon. Kieran Riviere remembered that it was under the leadership of this master that they were able to clear this cold dungeon. The guy who went back in time said that the dungeon wasn't easy, but for him, Perseus was like a savior. Kieran Riviere knew that even a man as prudent as Estelle would fall in one of the following locations. The young man at the top of the ranking admitted to himself that it was then that he realized that every person is just a toy. The guy thought that from that day on, he made a promise to himself that he would wipe this damn game off the face of the earth along with its creator. Perseus Estel asked why Mr. Kieran Riviere did not answer. Did he really have any doubts? Evander Ewell wondered if the 30th ranked player really expected to be picked by the strongest player. The top-ranked youth responded that he needed strong allies, and Perseus Estelle fit the bill. The boy's savior from his past life offered him stat cards as a small sign of respect. Kieran Riviere refused and thought that in his past life he had already paid him back in full, and now it was his turn. Perseus noted that Lord Kieran Riviera, of course, had no use for these E-rank stat cards. Estelle added that this beautiful lady standing next to the best player would certainly find them useful. The girl thought that with these characteristic cards, she would definitely become like a real superhero. However, Faustina mentally added that her boyfriend had not long ago refused Mr. Perseus's cards. The young man said that his girlfriend should decide for herself whether she would take them or not, and thought that his beloved needed them. Faustina thanked Mr. Perseus Estelle for his kindness and accepted the stat cards he offered her. Kieran's savior from his past life said that he was very grateful and thought that he could trust them now. Perseus thought that he would prepare a special gift for Lord Kieran when they returned to the real world. The young man said that killing the bottom floor boss would take more time, so they couldn't hesitate. Faustina and Perseus Estel immediately agreed with the strongest player and followed him. Evander thought that there was no way he would lose to such a bespectacled guy, and added that the best player would accept him into the team too. Evil mentally added that, of course, he also wanted to join Kieran's team, so he should ask loudly. The red-haired boy shouted to Mr. Kieran, asking for permission to join his squad. The young man from the first line of the rankings unceremoniously and in a commanding tone told a vendor to get lost. Evil was taken aback because he hadn't finished speaking yet, but Kieran Riviere didn't even think about changing his mind. Perseus told Lord Kieran that he knew a lot of details about this day of imprisonment dungeon. The young man replied that Estelle could call him by his name, and told him about the structure of the current dungeon. Perseus asked if they had started on the 4th floor and now had to defeat the bosses on the 1st and 7th. Estelle asked the guy if he knew about the boss's weaknesses, and he replied that they couldn't be killed by player attacks. Kieran added that they should bring these bosses together so that they would kill each other, and Perseus couldn't believe his ears. The young man noted that this was precisely why he decided to go to the 1st floor first and attract the attention of the first boss. The guy added that they could easily break through to the 7th floor, even if the boss was chasing them from the 1st. Perseus noted that a normal player would not be able to fight their way through monsters if they were being pursued by a dungeon boss. Faustina asked if the guy had deliberately dragged her into this dungeon, even knowing that he could handle it alone. Kieran Riviere replied that it was exactly as she thought, as her safety came first. The young man who returned to the past added that he was not ready to take the risk, so he chose the most reliable option. The girl tried to say that her boyfriend was a really caring person, but she sneezed loudly. Faustina Smith said it was getting cold on this floor again, even though her stats had already improved quite a bit. Kieran Riviere replied that the rate of temperature drop on this floor is twice as fast as on the starting floor. The young man added that this was precisely why they should not waste time in vain, to which everyone unanimously agreed. After a short time, the group of the guy from the first line of the rating reached the floor boss. Perseus Estelle was surprised that the boy could accurately determine the correct path in this huge labyrinth. Kieran Riviere replied that this was the dungeon that he would not be able to forget, even if he really wanted to. Perseus Estelle thought that the guy couldn't have been here before, because this game had only recently appeared in the world. The system notified players that they had encountered Alice, the Ice Pack leader, the D-rank floor boss. Kieran Riviere said that he would defeat the boss, and his comrades should get rid of the nearby ice ghouls. Perseus Estelle said that the guy at the top of the rankings doesn't have to worry because he will protect Faustina Smith. The young man who returned to the past thought that his girlfriend was safe with Perseus because he was very strong. Kieran Riviere thought that with Alice, the Ice Pack leader, there wouldn't be much trouble. The guy at the top of the world rankings shouted that this huge creature should not hesitate. Kieran Riviere realized that everything was exactly as he had expected. The giant wolf was about equal to him in strength. Meanwhile, the ordinary frost ghouls sensed the players nearby and decided to pounce on them at once. Perseus Estelle asked Faustina Smith to stay behind him while he dealt with the creatures of this floor. The man easily tossed the first monster aside and realized that they were incredibly weak for his level. The zombified monsters continued to rush at the players to satisfy their hunger and thirst. Perseus thought that he was the heir to the 8-trigram Pam style, which is why he passed the first dungeon so easily. Estelle said that Faustina Smith should not be afraid, because he would quickly deal with every monster. The man noticed that Mr. Kieran's beloved was not at all afraid of the ghouls. The girl happily declared that the player's stats were incredibly cool, because now she could beat monsters. Perseus Estelle realized that Faustina Smith was also full of energy, just like Mr. Kieran Riviere. Meanwhile, Alice, the Ice Pack leader, activated his special ability to unleash it on the boy. The young man ranked number 1 easily dodged the powerful attack of the giant frost dungeon beast. Kieran Riviere stated that there is a hole in this boss's attacks that makes him very easy to defeat. The boy, who had returned to the past, unleashed a barrage of Pax Sapiens attacks on the giant creature. Perseus thought that Kieran had many opportunities to finish off the wolf. But why didn't he take them? Estelle realized that the dungeon would become so cold that the other players would simply freeze to death. The man tried to understand what Mr. Kieran Riviere was thinking about now. He couldn't be deliberately stalling for time. The young man knew that killing this wolf would only anger the boss of the lower floor, and he would not receive any additional reward. The boy mentally added that if he managed to defeat the monster, leaving it alive, a hidden plot would be revealed. The strongest player noticed that he only needed to leave the wolf with 1% health with pinpoint accuracy. Perseus shouted that the Ice Pack leader was preparing a powerful skill, so they should take cover behind something. The man saw that the huge monster was about to unleash its devastating attack on them. Kieran Riviere exclaimed that Perseus was worrying in vain, and added that he must protect Faustina. Estelle couldn't understand what Mr. Kieran was planning, because even he wouldn't be able to take the boss's attack head-on. The man decided that he would trust the guy, because he had already recognized Kieran as the leader, which meant he had to be loyal to him. Perseus told Lord Kieran's girl that they must quickly return to the corridor to survive this attack. A few moments later, Alice, the Ice Pack leader, launched his powerful attack at the brave player. Faustina Smith noticed that the boss's attack had come very close and thanked the man for his help. The girl screamed that Kieran was still in the room with the boss and added that she had to return to him immediately. Perseus shouted that Faustina should stop because the young man himself had ordered him to take her away from the boss. Estelle added that they should stay put and trust Kieran, and Faustina asked if he could handle it. After some time, the storm in the boss's room died down, but Perseus insisted that they must wait. The guy at the top of the ranking shouted that his comrades could return to the Ice Pack leader's room. Faustina said it was the voice of Kieran Riviera, and Perseus Estelle said they had to hurry. The man couldn't believe his eyes when he saw that the boy had almost finished off Alice, the Ice Pack leader. Perseus Estelle immediately noticed that at the last % of health, the behavior of the huge monster changed. Faustina Smith is convinced that her boyfriend is the best Lockdown Day player in the entire world. Kieran Riviera's squad noticed that the ferocious beast's status had changed to extremely weakened. Faustina called the young man a real superhero, and Perseus noted that it was stupid to worry about Kieran. The young man who returned to the past said that now was the time to activate the floor's hidden quest. Estelle realized that the young man was not just stalling for time. He had known about the hidden mission of this dungeon from the very beginning. Faustina Smith happily exclaimed that hidden missions are always the coolest ones in these types of games. Kieran Riviere said he could take Alice to his owner and asked if the wolf wanted to go with him. The Ice Pack leader realized that his fight with the boy was pointless since he actually wanted to help him. The huge wolf whined, as if to let the player know that he accepted his invitation. The system notified the guy at the top of the rankings that Alice wanted to join Kieran Riviere's squad. The young man accepted the D-rank boss's request and saw a system notification that a hidden quest had been started. The system notified the guy that he had received an inventory ring and D-rank stat cards. Kieran Riviere thought that he needed D-rank stat cards to increase his attributes. Humanity's strongest player told the system that he wanted to activate all the stat cards he had received. The young man thought that now was the time to examine the ring he had just received for defeating the boss. The boy realized that the ring allowed the wearer to store up to 5 cubic meters of objects, but not living beings. Kieran Riviere thought it was a fantastic thing, as it would make carrying supplies much easier. The young man at the top of the ratings heard the barking, saw the dog, and said that he liked this image of Alice better. Kieran Riviere's squad couldn't believe their eyes when they saw a cute dog instead of a huge, scary wolf. Faustina asked if this cutie was the boss of the basement of the apartments of the Deadly Cold. The young man replied that this was indeed the case, and added that he could return it to its former appearance at any time. The guy who returned to the past said that he was joking, because now the wolf is in his true form. Faustina Smith asked the guy if all the bosses in this dungeon were originally this cute. Perseus said that he hadn't even thought about it, because if that was the case, then the creators of this game were real monsters. The young man said that the deeper they went into the dungeon, the darker secrets would be revealed to them. The girl said that now she understood why the guy set a goal to destroy the Day of Imprisonment and its creator. After some time, Kieran Riviere's squad found a hidden passage that led to the next floor. Perseus Estelle asked his comrades if he thought he heard meowing from the next floor. Faustina Smith asked if there was a cat downstairs and felt that Alice was becoming unreasonably angry. The world #1 young man replied that it wasn't just a cat, but the boss of the next floor. The guy who returned to the past said that they needed to go because someone was already waiting for his old friend. The players descended to the second floor of the apartments of Biting Cold and saw dozens of E and D rank zombies ahead. The system notified players that Frost Soulseekers had just detected players on their floor. Kieran Riviere said that the closer they get to the final boss, the more enemies they will encounter. The youth who returned to the past added that this place was significantly more dangerous than the E-rank training dungeons. The guy thought that despite this, his group had an outstanding player, Perseus, with an exclusive skill. Kieran Riviere noticed that Estelle had rushed forward to attack the ordinary monsters of this floor. The man easily pushed back the first Frost Soulseeker with his special skill, Perseus's comrades were surprised to see that the player's blow had left a hole through the monster. The system notified Estelle that his stats had been increased by the special effect of family art. Kieran Riviere thought that strong players don't stand still either, and are constantly developing their talents. The man advanced down the corridor, crushing every monster he encountered with the art of 8 trigram Pam. Perseus said that Lord Kieran needed to recuperate before the next boss fight. Faustina Smith said she knew Perseus was strong before, but he's still impressed with his abilities. Kieran said that Estelle was doing a good job of clearing the way for them, but he had no idea which way the boss was. The man admitted that this was indeed the case, but the frosty dead could still become a hindrance to them. Perseus felt several zombie monsters decide to attack him from his blind spot. Faustina Smith screamed that Mr. Estelle should be careful because there was a zombie behind him. The man realized that he would not have time to defend himself even with the 8 trigram Pam technique. Perseus realized that the monsters had gotten too close, which is why he couldn't respond to them with his technique. Humanity's best player ordered the man to duck immediately, and he thought it was Mr. Kieran's voice. Estelle pressed himself to the ground without hesitation and saw the boy's weapon skill fly over his head. The young man who returned to the past decided that this was the best opportunity to use Pax Sapiens' skill. Faustina Smith said that no matter how many times she looked at the boy, his strength always amazed her. Perseus thought that the power of Lord Kieran Riviera undoubtedly went beyond all imaginable limits. The young man at the top of the rankings suggested that his group follow him, because he knew exactly where the boss was hiding. After some time of wandering through the icy corridors of the cold apartments, the guy announced that they had arrived. The system alerted players that they had encountered a D-rank Cat King boss, Baby Boss. Players have noticed that the boss of this floor has a passive buff called Agile Predator, which grants agility. Faustina said that this cat was also cute, but Perseus said that with such dimensions, this word is not appropriate. The youth who returned to the past thought that his agility was significantly inferior to the enhanced Cat King. Kieran Riviere mentally added that he would have to resort to trickery to defeat this boss. A young man at the top of the rankings asked his beloved to lend him Alice, the ice pack leader, for a while. The guy said that this was another hidden rule of the D-rank dungeon: Apartments of the Fierce Cold. Kieran asked his comrades to take care of the Frost Soul Seekers so that they would not get under his feet. Perseus accepted the master's order, and Faustina said that the guy could rely on her because she would do everything. Estelle thought that Lady Faustina was acting bravely, but she clearly lacked real combat experience. Kieran decided that he shouldn't drag out the battle with this boss, because they would soon be going up. The Cat King, Baby Boss, ordered the Frost Ghouls to attack the boy who recently defeated Alice. The young man, #1 in the world rankings, thought that these creatures were too weak to stop him. The guy who returned to the past declared that these stupid monsters were just getting in his way. Kieran Riviere easily cut down the monsters sent for his soul by the Cat King, Baby Boss. The youth who returned to the past jumped up to unleash his full power on the D-rank boss. The huge monster screamed in rage at the player who dared to challenge him alone. The guy saw that the boss had gone on the attack, which meant he needed to quickly stop the monster's onslaught. Without a second thought, Kieran Riviere threw Alice at the massive boss cat and ordered him to speak up. The icy pack leader, thrown against an old comrade, realized that he must help the players for the sake of his friend. Alasa activated the ice pack leader's roar skill to lower the Cat King's stats. The system notified that the baby boss heard Alice's voice and received a penalty to his stats. The boy who returned to the past gathered the maximum power in his sword to bring it down on the King of Cats, Baby Boss. Humanity's strongest player thought that this should be enough to defeat the dangerous monster. Kieran Rivera's teammates saw that this boss also received a weakening effect at the last percent of health. The young man at the top of the rankings said that now it was necessary to move on to the next step of the hidden rule. The boy asked the boss kid if he wanted to go with him and Alice to his master. The Cat King thought seriously, because this offer from the player was incredibly tempting. The Ice Pack leader thought that his comrade would agree in a heartbeat if he personally asked him to join them. Baby Boss reluctantly accepted Alice's invitation and sent Kieran Riviera an application to join the squad. The system notified the player that he had defeated the basement boss of the Cat King, Baby Boss. The system notified the young man that he had received a D-rank damaged enhancement core as a reward. The young man exclaimed that he had received one of the rarest cards, and that he could now improve his pack sapiens. The guy at the top of the world rankings told the system that he wanted to use stat cards. Faustina noticed that the special effect of Alice and the baby boss had been applied to Kieran Riviera's entire group at once. Perseus Estel was surprised that their rewards in the dungeon were now increased by 50%. The young man suggested that his comrades go to the next frontier to meet the final boss. The guy added that this will be the first boss that players won't be able to defeat in their usual way. Faustina noticed that on the first floor, everything had indeed turned into a real ice cave. The young man who returned to the past thought about how his sword would change when he applied the upgrade card to it. The guy mentally added that upgrading a weapon to D rank only slightly increases damage, but it's better than nothing. Kieran Riviere activated the D-rank Corrupted Enhancement Core to increase Pax Sapiens' stats. The guy noticed that his sword's first skill was already at level 2, and a second ability slot had appeared. The young man thought that after upgrading the sword, its characteristics shouldn't change too much. Kieran Riviere noticed that after the buff, Sky Cleaving Strike had entered its second stage. The guy at the top of the leaderboard thought it was a good time to draw a card to fill his second ability slot. The system announced that the random selection of an exclusive skill for the Pax Sapiens weapon has been launched. Kieran thought that only he could see this card selection. What rank of ability would come out this time? The young man mentally added that the colors of the cards that appeared directly affected the rank of the skill they contained. The guy who returned to the past mentally exclaimed that he initially wanted to choose this particular card. The system notified the young man that the selection of an exclusive skill for his Pax Sapiens sword had been completed. The system congratulated Kieran on receiving the B-rank skill Wind Stream, which increases agility by 5. The top-ranked young man thought that this was quite good, as it was an extremely useful speed boost. A small group of players noticed a crowd of D-rank Frost Soul Seekers ahead of the icy corridor. Perseus noticed that there were even more monsters on the first floor, and Faustina declared that she would also fight them. Estelle mentally added that for Kieran, these creatures were nothing more than bugs, and they were just there for extras. The young man at the top of the ranking said that he leaves this small matter to his comrades, because they need to raise their level. Faustina asked if her boyfriend would go to the boss alone, and Perseus wondered when it had ever been different. The guy added that he would simply lure the boss, and Faustina and Perseus should not waste time. The girl asked Kieran to be careful and come back quickly, and did not even expect that he would ignore her. One of the nearby Frost Soul Seekers wheezed and lunged at Faustina Smith. However, the girl did not lose her composure and reacted instantly, hitting the ordinary monster right in the face. The man saw that the frost monster was unable to stay on its feet after being hit by Lord Kieran's beloved. Faustina offered these monsters a taste of her fists, which she had trained for over 10 years. The girl stated that she had wasted no time being in that damn dungeon of the day of confinement. Faustina added that it was all for the sake of protecting Kieran, a power she had forged with her own hands. Perseus Estelle thought that Mrs. Faustina Smith was not as simple as he had initially thought. The man added that in Kieran's absence, the girl seems to drop her mask and show her true face. Perseus Estelle easily dispatched the monster that attempted to attack him from a blind spot. The man added that in that case, he too should take the matter seriously so as not to let Mr. Kieran down. The Frost Soul Seekers thought they could easily overwhelm a small group of players with sheer numbers. Perseus Estelle and Faustina Smith saw that the Frost Ghouls were rushing in their direction like a real wall. Each of them understood that this battle would not be the easiest, because there was an incredible number of monsters. Meanwhile, the system notified Kieran that he had found the final boss of the Apartments of the Deep Cold. The system warned the player that this boss could summon up to 6 ice spears with a snap of his fingers. The final boss said that it had been a long time since she had seen living flesh on her floor of the Apartments of the Fierce Cold. The young man thought he had one chance to awaken the girl's memories with the help of the voices of the dog and the cat. The boss said the guy's blood smelled sweet, and he thought he had a 50% chance of success. The final boss screamed that she wanted the player's blood, and Kieran ordered the pets to speak up. The young man, who is ranked #1 in the world, mentally added that this should work. The system notified the guy who returned to the past that the awakening of the boss's memories had failed. Kieran Riviere saw that the female monster had become enraged after Alice and the baby boss's combined skill. The young man told his pets that they were not to blame for what had happened, because he himself did not believe that it would work the first time. The final boss screamed even louder that she wanted to taste fresh flesh and demanded to give even more blood. The guy who returned to the past thought that he should stall for time so that his comrades could gain more experience. Meanwhile, Perseus Estel stated that they had dealt with all the ice spirits in the current corridor. Faustina Smith admitted that these creatures were very dangerous, but the level increase was definitely worth it. The man said that something huge was approaching them, and the girl decided that it was Chiron who lured the boss. Perseus noticed that the girl's face instantly changed, as if she were innocence itself. But in reality, she was a real hurricane. A small group of players who had made their way to the first floor of the apartments of the Biting Cold noticed their comrade. Faustina Smith was glad that her boyfriend returned so quickly. Could the boss really be that weak? However, right behind Kieran Riviere, the final boss appeared, trying in vain to catch up with the young man. Faustina screamed, asking what that giant was, and Perseus exclaimed that this could not be the final boss. The young man at the top of the rankings said that they should return the same way because it was time for them to reach the top floor. The giant monster screamed that it would finish off this small player and suck out every last drop of his blood. Estelle offered to relieve Mr. Kieran Riviera so that he could rest on the way to the upper floor. The guy who returned to the past said that as long as he was alive, the boss would not switch to anyone else. The final boss laughed ominously and declared that the player must give her all of their sweet blood. The young man at the top of the world rankings easily dodged the ice spears of a huge monster. Perseus noted that only Lord Kieran could maintain absolute composure under the gun of such a creature. A small group of players noticed that the Frost Soul Seekers had appeared ahead again. Riviere remembered that as long as the final boss of the floor was alive, the ice undead would respawn indefinitely. Perseus shouted that the small monsters would not bother them, and Faustina added that she was no longer afraid of these creatures. The young man at the top of the rankings thought that his teammates had made a huge step forward and become stronger. Meanwhile, on the third floor of the dungeon, ordinary players tried to survive among mediocre monsters. Evander Evil punched another ordinary monster to show his new comrades his strength. The young gentleman's boys shouted that he was the best, and he asked them not to make a fuss over such trifles. Evander asked why the building started shaking, and his subordinate replied that it sounded like an earthquake. Another of Evil's comrades noticed that the earthquakes were not so rhythmic, and pointed to Kieran, who appeared in the distance. Evander asked why the leader's group was returning, since they were going after the final boss on the lower floor. A moment later, the system notified Evil's squad that the final boss of the dungeon had appeared ahead. Evander exclaimed that this was very bad, and one of his guys noticed that Kieran was running away from the Ice Maiden. Perseus Estel shouted that these idiots had to get out of the way if they didn't want to be eliminated from this damn game. Evander stated that some lousy boss couldn't stop him, because he was the future strongest player. Evil cried out, daring the huge, ugly creature to come at him. Evander, one at a time. The 800th support group saw a moment later how the final boss literally smashed the guy into the ground. The red-haired man couldn't believe that this giant creature had trampled him and continued to pursue Kieran. Evander Evil's men screamed, trying to bring their dim-witted but ambitious leader to his senses. The young man said that the Ice Maiden had identified him as a target, so she would not attack the others. Kieran's small group heard a system notification that they had crossed the middle floor boundary. Faustina asked if the bosses on the next floors would have some hidden rules like Alice's. The young man replied that on the upper tiers they would only meet those who were hated by the final boss of the upper floor. The guy added that at the very top is the father of their Ice Maiden, who has been unhappy all his life. Kieran knew that the girl grew up without a mother's warmth, and her father was constantly staying late at work. The young man who returned to the past remembered that one day, when the girl was waiting for her father by the road, she was fatally hit by a truck. Riviere stated that the creatures who created this game had cruelly taken advantage of their souls by trapping them here. The guy added that players who manage to find the correct key can give their souls a short meeting. Kieran said that this is why he calls this secret ending the true end of the trial. Faustina said that she had no idea that the final bosses of this dungeon would meet such a tragic fate. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor, a small group of players tried to come up with tactics to fight the mutant boss. The system notified that the players were facing a farrier doctor who had killed countless people. Faustina stated that no normal doctor in the world would look so suspicious. Humanity's strongest player ordered everyone in the room to immediately fall to the floor. The players didn't expect to see anyone in this boss's room, as they had ended up there completely by accident. Unknown players saw that the young man who appeared in the room activated some kind of cutting skill. The players gathered in the farrier's room watched with bated breath as the young man's magical incisions flew. Kieran Riviere didn't wait for the system's notification, but ran towards the opening without slowing down. The unnamed players couldn't believe that anyone in this dungeon was capable of taking out the boss with one hit. Some of the players noticed that a huge monster marked as the final boss flew into the boss room. The players screamed, asking what kind of creature it was. But when they noticed the system notification, they became even more taken aback. The strangers fell to their knees and asked why the final boss of the lowest floor was on the upper tiers. The players couldn't believe that the Ice Maiden wasn't even going to attack them. Could it really be that those guys had dragged her along with them? The Nameless realized that the small group of 3 people had already cleared all the lower floors. The system alerted Kieran and his comrades that the next boss had gone all out with illegal body modifications. Perseus Estelle and Faustina Smith noticed that the crazy trucker possessed simply incredible strength. The guy at the top of the rankings knew that they shouldn't waste much time on such a mediocre boss. The mad trucker swung his massive fist, hoping to crush Kieran Riviera. However, the young man who returned to the past had no doubt that the boss was a head weaker than him. The system has notified players that the crazed trucker has been killed by Kieran Riviere. The guy at the top of the rankings thought that all they had left to do was face the second final boss. The young man who had returned to the past without thinking twice ran upstairs to quickly complete the passage. An unknown creature peered out from behind the shattered floor of the crazy trucker's room. The dark monster said that some players completed the trial faster than the gods themselves expected. The unknown being added that these mortals are a true anomaly of the day of imprisonment. The system alerted a small group of players that powerful mutated monsters were standing in their way. Kieran Riviere knew that just before the final boss room there would be an incredible crowd of mutant monsters. The monsters on the upper floors of the apartments immediately turned their attention to the players who had risen to their floor. The guy at the top of the rankings decided that the best solution would be to let his comrades go ahead of him. The young man shouted that they needed to break through, because behind this horde was the door to the last boss's room. The mutated monsters loudly wheezed that they would kill these players to satisfy their hunger. Kieran Riviere said he would take on these creatures, and Perseus and Faustina should run forward without looking back. The young man activated Pax Sapien's special skill to crush all the ordinary monsters with one attack. Estelle and Smith leaned on the door, intending to knock down its doors so that they would not interfere with the best player in humanity. The girl noted that they had managed to knock down the door, and the man added that they had reached the final boss. The system notified players that they had encountered the topmost floor's boss, the Frost Origin. Faustina Smith asked if this was the final boss of the top floor of the apartment. Perseus added that he could not tell from his appearance that the man was unhappy, and heard the doors slam behind him. The system warned that the passage was blocked until the player on the other side completed the task. The man screamed, asking how this was even possible since Kieran Riviere had not warned about such a thing. Faustina Smith said they would have to hold out until the boy arrived, and Perseus said he was ready to fight to the death. Meanwhile, the guy thought that urgent quests in the middle of a battle should have appeared much later. The young man realized that everything in this life was going wrong, because the timed quest was already in the second dungeon. The guy who returned to the past wondered what the hell was watching him, because it wasn't there before. Kieran suggested that the evil gods had assigned a pawn to the best player to control his growth. The young man realized that his rebirth had affected the laws of the game, and now he could not rely on his memory. The guy thought that the system obliged him to clear this floor in 5 minutes, but he should do it even faster. Riviere knew that if he failed this urgent task, the door to the boss's room would never open again. A young man at the top of the world rankings saw mutated creatures trying to escape from him. The guy who returned to the past realized that the evil gods had even rewritten the behavior of mobs because of him alone. Kieran thought that if they were competing in speed, then thanks to the B-rank Windstream skill, They were no match for him. The young man noticed that the Ice Maiden had already caught up with him, which meant that it would now be more difficult to deal with ordinary mobs. The guy realized that the trick of the evil gods was that the final boss of the lower floor with him. The Ice Maiden screamed, demanding that Kieran Riviera give her all his sweet blood. The guy at the top of the rankings realized that the boss's daughter had decided to use ice spears. The Ice Maiden, without hesitation, unleashed all the ice needles at her disposal on the strong player. However, when the huge monster pushed aside the shards of ice, he did not see Kieran Riviera among them. The young man thought that he had wasted too much time fighting the final boss of the lower floor. The boy who returned to the past activated his sword's special skill, Heaven-Cutting Strike. Humanity's best player hoped that this blow would allow him to stop the Ice Maiden. The giant monster couldn't believe that this young man decided to attack her from a blind spot at such a moment. The final boss from the very bottom floor laughed and said that this guy decided to come from behind. Kieran Riviere thought that he had to find and exterminate the last monsters on this floor as quickly as possible. The guy mentally added that it was impossible to kill the Ice Maiden now, but this blow would be enough to stop her. The young man understood that he had to clear the floor in the shortest possible time in order to open those damn doors. Kieran knew that the final boss of the upper floor was a cut above the Ice Maiden, meaning his comrades were in danger. The guy mentally asked Perseus Estel and his beloved to hold on, because he was already on his way. Meanwhile, the following events took place in the locked room of the final boss. The source of the cold swung and brought down a powerful blow with all its might on Perseus Estel. The man flew into the opposite wall and shouted something unintelligible from the incredible pain and injuries he had sustained. Perseus Estel thought that this monster had an incredible speed that an ordinary person could not keep up with. The man didn't believe that Mr. Kieran Riviere fought monsters of that level alone. Perseus mentally added that he had previously naively believed that he was on roughly the same level as the guy. However, the man realized that there was an insurmountable gap between the first and 30th lines of the ranking. Faustina Smith pounced on the massive final boss to stop it from attacking Estelle. The girls screamed that Perseus must get up because they had promised Kieran that they would hold out until his arrival. Faustina Smith realized that she had been wrong to turn away from the final boss of the dungeon's top floor. The original source of the cold lifted the girl above the ground to deal her the final blow. However, Perseus shouted, "Family Art 8 Trigram Pam, 3rd form," and launched a clot of energy at the creature. Kieran's beloved Rivera cried out, wondering if Lord Perseus Estelle had finally found the strength to stand firm. The man stated that he would not back down anymore and added that he would never give in to the final boss. The boss of the topmost floor of the apartments of the Biting Cold got angry at the player who hit him hard. The man shouted that this huge creature should not underestimate his true abilities. 8 Trigram Pam. Perseus Estel unleashed another attack of pure spiritual energy on the dungeon's most dangerous monster. The man, who recognized Kieran Riviere as the leader, followed the initial attack with dozens of blows. The final boss, standing on the very top floor of the apartments of Biting Cold, realized that he couldn't move from the spot. Perseus Estel said that he couldn't even imagine that a special energy control technique would be useful to him here. The man remembered his father once saying that 8 Trigram Pam was not a close combat style. Elder Estel added that once his son mastered the true nature of the palms, he would be able to strike enemies from a distance. Perseus thought that, unfortunately, he had never been able to master this technique as fully as he would have liked. The man thought that he could only hold out in a state of rage for a maximum of 3 minutes. The original source of the cold shouted in rage that he would deal with this bug first. Perseus Estel thought that the creature's wounds had healed on their own, just as Master Kieran had said. The man thought that he couldn't damage the final boss, but he was quite capable of withstanding his attacks. Young Estelle launched another blast of 8 Trigram Pam art at the giant monster. Perseus saw that the source of cold did not even notice his last attack, continuing to run towards him. The man couldn't believe that this boss had already adapted to the power of his long-range life energy strikes. The young heir to the art of 8 Trigram Pam realized that he had completely forgotten about the incredible dexterity of the boss. Perseus mentally added that in such a situation, all he could do was fight to the death. The man put all his strength into the next blow to escape the final boss's death grip. However, The giant creature didn't even notice the player's pathetic attempt to attack it using all the strength available. The system notified Perseus that his stamina had been completely depleted and the rage state had been removed early. The man realized that he could no longer continue, as the constant energy control had drained his strength. The final boss of the highest floor of the apartments of the deadly cold decided to answer the player in the same coin. Perseus Estelle thought he had reached his limit as the dungeon boss was about to kill him. The original source of the cold felt the second player attack him from behind at the most inopportune moment. Faustina Smith stated that she tried to save this weapon card for Kieran Riviera. The girl added that Mr. Perseus's life was hanging by a thread, so she was obliged to activate it personally. The man couldn't believe what he saw, because Lady Faustina had chosen an incredibly useful weapon. Perseus Estelle asked himself how he could have missed the moment when the girl activated her card. Faustina Smith declared that she and Lord Perseus would hold out until Kieran Riviera arrived, no matter the cost. The man saw that the final boss of the highest floor of the apartment did not even notice the girl's shots. Perseus Estelle shouted that Faustina should not try to stop the boss, as he quickly adapts to attacks. Kieran's beloved Rivera realized that she would no longer have time to escape from this incredibly huge monster. The source of the cold grabbed Faustina Smith in a death grip, preventing her from escaping his next attack. The girl thought that her situation was very bad, because this monster could take her life at any moment. Kieran's beloved decided that she shouldn't panic, but she shouldn't calmly wait for her death either. The final boss of the highest floor didn't like the girl's resistance, so he threw her aside. Perseus Estelle saw Mrs. Faustina Smith hit the opposite wall of the room. The girl said she was sorry, and the man replied that the monster was too strong for them to handle. The system notified players that the final boss had activated the special skill Frost Breath. Faustina Smith said that this was the end, because they would never survive such an attack from such a monster. Perseus Estelle added that if this blow hit even close to them, they would not survive it. The girl said that she was very sorry, and the man asked if there was anything in Faustina's life that she regretted. A small group of players realized that they could no longer escape death, as time was running out. Faustina Smith said her only regret was not dying with Kieran Riviere. Humanity's strongest player barged into the boss's room without waiting for notification that the door was unlocked. Kieran Riviere apologized for being late, and added that he had encountered some unexpected difficulties. Faustina said that she had not even hoped to see the boy again, and Perseus noted that the young man had already saved his life twice. Kieran Riviere thought that if he had been even a second late, there would have been no one left to save. The young man who returned to the past said that they were now safe, because all the conditions for passing the floor had been met. The Ice Maiden burst out laughing and screamed in rage that she wanted the sweet blood of that boy with the sword. The original source of the cold was taken aback because he couldn't believe his own eyes when he saw the boss of the lower floor. The players on the top floor saw that the Ice Maiden also froze at the sight of her own father. The system has notified players that all hidden conditions for completing Apartments of the Deadly Cold have been met. The system announced that the long-awaited meeting between father and daughter finally took place thanks to the players. Kieran Riviere noticed a notification that the Ice Maiden had met with the source of frost. The system alerted players that the final story scenario had been successfully launched. The final boss of the bottom floor screamed that she was incredibly happy to see her father. The man who was the source of the cold instantly recognized his little girl and burst into tears. The system notified that the true ending had been unlocked, and the boss's memories had been implanted into the players' memories. Faustina said that everything turned out exactly as her boyfriend said, because the bosses turned out to be the unfortunate victims. The young man thought that it was no coincidence that he was experiencing this strange feeling, and he asked himself whether everything would really go so smoothly. The being that watches over the apartments of biting cold declared that everything had happened too quickly, and the gods were angry. Kieran Riviere thought that this lackey of the evil gods had finally decided to show himself and act against him. Faustina Smith asked her lover what kind of abomination had appeared before them. The messenger of the evil gods burst out laughing and declared that they simply had to amuse his masters properly. The being watching over the dungeon added that mortals could not understand the greatness of divine blessing. The messenger of the evil gods declared that it was his sacred duty to please his masters and give them joy. The creature watching over the apartments of Biting Cold added that the real show was about to begin. The unknown being added that right now a grand spectacle was beginning for its masters, the evil gods. Players on the topmost floor saw that the messenger of the evil gods was attacking the former bosses of the dungeon. Faustina, Perseus, and Kieran couldn't believe their eyes when they realized that the bosses had transformed into terrifying monsters. The Frostspawn and the Ice Maiden roared in rage at the players who had helped them reunite not long ago. Faustina asked what was going on, and Perseus asked if they would have to fight them again. Alas, the Ice Pack leader, and the Cat King, Baby Boss, rushed forward to talk some sense into their masters. The best player's girlfriend screamed that Alice and Baby Boss should go back because it was dangerous there now. The messenger of the evil gods declared that these two should also join in the fun for the glory of the great gods. Perseus shouted that this bastard wanted to return all the bosses to their previous state. They couldn't allow that. Kieran immediately shielded the animals with his body and fought off the unknown man's chains to save Alice and Baby Boss's sanity. Faustina Smith shouted, asking if her lover had decided to challenge all the bosses at once. The unknown creature declared that it was this wretched worm that was forever hindering the triumph of the great gods, its masters. Kieran Riviere thought that the appearance of this strange eye was not unexpected for him, because he had seen it before. The young man mentally added that this creature had neither level nor health, because the system did not see it at all. The guy thought that he had never encountered anything like this in the past, and the messenger ordered the bosses to destroy this anomaly. The final bosses of the lower and upper floors instantly obeyed the order of the henchmen of the higher beings. Kieran Riviere shouted that his comrades must get Alice and Baby Boss out of here immediately. The young man who returned to the past thought that he simply had to destroy the messenger of the evil gods. The guy at number 1 in the world rankings activated Pax Sapiens' special ability, Sky Cleaving Strike. Kieran Riviere noted that even his strongest attack did not deal much damage to previous final bosses. Humanity's best player thought that these father and daughter were simply impossible to kill with conventional weapons. The guy who returned to the past couldn't believe his eyes when he saw that he was able to damage the bosses. Kieran Riviere wondered why Frostspring and Ice Maiden had lost some of their health. The system notified players that they would receive double rewards if they defeated bosses by erasing them from existence. An unknown being declared that if the players defeat the father and daughter, the very essence of their existence will be erased forever. The messenger of the gods declared that they were once human, but now their souls belonged entirely to his masters. The minion of the evil gods added that players can kill them without remorse, since the bosses are no longer human. The best player of the Day of Imprisonment thought that the creature standing before him was simply an incredibly disgusting creature. Faustina Smith shouted that this creature was quite a beast, since it was suggesting to mock the father and daughter. The messenger of the gods reminded the players that this entire spectacle was created only to amuse the higher beings. The creature stated that if they did not put on a great show, their actions would be considered the greatest blasphemy. Kieran's beloved screamed that she didn't give a damn about the fucking gods and demanded that this vile task be cancelled. The messenger of the evil gods declared that the girl had only a pitiful toothpick in her hands, and not the formidable weapon she thought she had. The unknown creature added that such an insignificant weapon could not harm him. Perseus realized that the creature was on a completely different level if it was able to catch a bullet with its bare hands. Kieran Riviere realized that his opponent was capable of catching a bullet with his fingers, which meant he wasn't so simple. Meanwhile, Frostspring and Ice Maiden raised their fists to bring them down on the best player. The young man at the top of the rankings thought that he would have to come up with a way to bypass this system task. The guy mentally added that he couldn't use his sword, because now it would actually destroy their souls. Kieran Riviere understood that the father and daughter were now the bosses of the dungeon, but it wasn't their fault. The young man thought that these two only wanted to hold on to at least a grain of their happiness, even at such a terrible price. The boy who returned to the past noticed that the origin of Frost and the Ice Maiden could not hold back their tears. Kieran Riviere asked himself why they were crying, whether it was really akin to unbearable suffering for them. The world number 1 young man heard the voices of his bosses in his head, begging him to give them peace. The boy asked himself if he could really hear the voices of the Source of Frost and the Ice Maiden. The final boss of the lowest floor said that they could no longer bear this unbearable torture. The final boss of the topmost floor of the Apartments of the Deadly Cold asked the boy to end their torment. Kieran Riviere realized he was the only one who could really help a father and daughter with a sad story. The Source of Frost and the Ice Maiden begged the boy to free them from this endless pain. The final boss of the bottom floor said that they no longer want to take other people's lives for the sake of existence. Meanwhile, the unknown creature reveled in the pain of the dungeon bosses, enjoying the convulsions in their bodies. The messenger of the evil gods added that it was precisely this show that his masters, the great gods of this world, longed to see. The unknown one declared that nothing in this world could bring the gods such joy as the purest primordial evil. Kieran promised the final bosses that he would give them the peace they longed for. But before that, he would have to do something. The guy at the top of the rankings declared that he would send to the next world one scumbag who dared to trample their lives. The young man who returned to the past added that he would do this right in front of the bosses of the Apartments of Fierce Cold. The unknown one shouted that he was a messenger of the great gods, and therefore mere mortals would never be able to reach him. Kieran Riviere stated that this creature is also made of flesh and blood, which means it is mortal just like people. The unknown creature screamed, asking how the young man could know such details about him. The guy said that the day would come when he would finish off those bastards that this creature called gods. Kieran Riviere shouted that this dark creature would be the first to go to the underworld to await its masters. The subordinate of the evil gods cried out, begging his great masters for protection and salvation. However, the crushing blow of the young man who returned to the past had already achieved its goal. Perseus Estelle and Faustina Smith witnessed an incredibly powerful explosion that erupted from the body of the messenger of the evil gods. The girl exclaimed that her boyfriend was simply amazing, because only he could cope with such a creature. The world #1 young man said his teammates were celebrating their victory too early. The dark silhouette that appeared in the center of the explosion was surprised that his subordinate was killed by some toy. Faustina Smith realized that her joy was in vain, because there really was an ominous silhouette hidden behind the smoke. Perseus Estelle said that that dark monster should have definitely been killed by Lord Kieran Riviere's attack. One of the evil gods who invented the Day of Imprisonment declared that it was absurd and incredibly funny. The unknown person admitted that what happened in this dungeon irritates him greatly, but he can't do anything about it. A team of players who successfully cleared a D-ranked dungeon realized that a supreme being stood before them. Faustina Smith asked her comrades where this huge creature could have come from, talking about its subordinate. Perseus Estelle said that this monster was causing a monstrous pressure that was making it difficult for him to breathe. The young man at the top of the rankings asked if this great god really wanted to fight them right now. God chuckled and stated that according to divine rules, he had no right to attack the guy in this dungeon. The unknown man stated that at their next meeting, he would personally ask for the head of this pathetic little man. The creature added that until then, the young man must try and survive in order to become a worthy opponent. The girl admitted that she almost suffocated, and the man said that it was just an incredibly creepy creature. The boy was surprised that in this life, evil gods began to interfere in the dungeons much earlier. The young man thought that he had killed one of the avatars of these creatures and assumed that they sensed something was wrong. Kieran mentally added that no matter what the evil gods did, he would still go through with it and destroy them. The final bosses from the upper and lower floors thanked the young man for taking revenge on the minion of the gods. The Ice Maiden said that now the big brother must let them leave here forever. The world #1 ranked player said he would not prolong the father and daughter's suffering. Riviere thought that the only thing he could do for these poor souls was to give them a peaceful death. The guy who returned to the past mentally added that he would end this in the most painless way for them. The young man at the top of the Lockdown Day leaderboard swung Pax Sapiens to decapitate the bosses. Kieran Riviere thought that no one in this world was worthy of becoming a plaything in the hands of evil gods. The unnamed father and daughter could not believe that their souls would finally be able to find the long-awaited peace. The former final boss of the topmost floor of the Apartments of the Biting Cold thanked the guy once again. The girl who was the Ice Maiden said that they had finally found the freedom they had long dreamed of. Kieran Riviere said a silent farewell to the father and daughter and wished them luck in the next life. Faustina Smith said that it was all over, and Perseus Estelle remarked that this was the best ending for them. Alas, the Ice Pack leader and the King of Cats, Baby Boss, felt their souls follow their masters. Kieran's lover, Rivera, asked her comrades what was going on with Baby Boss and Alice. However, the girl almost immediately realized that everything was fine with the final boss's pets. Faustina Smith wished the children happiness in their next life, as it will definitely be joyful. The system notified players that the apartments of the deep cold dungeon had been successfully completed. The young man said that the dungeon space had already begun to collapse while the rewards for completing the dungeon were being counted. The system warned players that everything obtained in this dungeon could be transferred to the real world. Meanwhile, the players on the starting floor had no idea that their torment would soon be over. People did not understand what kind of dungeon this was and asked why there were no entrances or exits in this labyrinth. Players complained that there were monsters and freezing cold everywhere, noting that it was impossible to fight there. At the same time, one floor above, Evander Evil's small group encountered another monster. The red-haired guys shouted that if this continued, they would turn into real ice cubes. One of the players added that this dungeon is incredibly difficult, but the guy in first place completes it with ease. Evander Evil realized that he was too tired and cold to continue running at the same pace. The team of the world's number 800 player feared for their boss when he tripped and fell. The red-haired man realized that an ordinary monster of this dungeon was about to finish him off, the future leader of the rating. Evander Evil thought that this was the end of his story, and he had not yet become the #1 player in the world. The system notified players that the apartments of the deep cold dungeon had been successfully completed. The red-haired man saw that along with the notification that appeared, the monster that was chasing him also disappeared. The average players couldn't believe they had finally made it through the dreaded apartments of the bitter cold. People couldn't even imagine who the great god was who cleared out this damn dungeon. The system displayed a rating of players based on their contribution to clearing the apartments of the fierce, cold dungeon. Evander's boys couldn't believe that Kieran was human, because he had collected 80% of the contribution. Perseus noticed that the system had issued a D-rank stat card, which increased all stats by 3 levels. Kieran Riviere thought it was just a basic reward that all surviving players received. Faustina Smith said she got 2 extra Elf's Blessing cards that increase her mana. Perseus said that he was given the tattered glove of the martial artist, but the effect is unknown to him yet. Estelle equipped the reward and saw that the glove had a chance to deal double damage in melee combat. The man exclaimed that this was simply incredible, because now one blow from him could decide the entire outcome of the fight. Faustina asked what her boyfriend had received, and Perseus remarked that with such a contribution, the reward must be incredible. Kieran Riviere said he wasn't given anything special, just a few points and just 1 map fragment. The young man thought that this was no ordinary fragment, because it was part of a C-rank card that could withstand the gods. Kieran Rivera's comrades were outraged, as their rewards seemed much more useful to them. The top-ranked young man said the map fragment looked like garbage, but it was actually quite logical. The guy thought that in the Evil God's game Day of Imprisonment, there were only 15 unique C-rank cards. Kieran mentally added that each of these cards possessed monstrous power and incredible rarity. The young man remembered well that in his past life he had paid an unimaginable price for his first C-rank card. The guy thought that getting one of the 4 fragments already in the second dungeon was a colossal stroke of luck. Riviere added mentally that, despite all the cruelty of the Day of Confinement, its rules were absolutely fair. The young man understood that for now, all he could do was hide this fragment and carefully store it in his inventory. Faustina Smith exclaimed that she too had made it into the world rankings and immediately shot up to number 630. Perseus Estelle said his ranking had not changed and noted that the rankings were now very competitive. Kieran Riviere said that players learn the rules very quickly and unlock their potential for mastery. The young man added that this is precisely why he shared guides. He wants to save this world. The guy said that this was not a personal battle, but a battle for the survival of humanity, for saving the planet from total destruction. Kieran added that in the next dungeons, they must fight for the sake of humanity, and not for selfish purposes. Perseus Estelle realized that there was something incredible, something inspiring in the words of Lord Kieran Riviera. Faustina Smith thought her boyfriend was saying all this as if he had already been through a similar terrible experience. The man said his views were too narrow, but he would remember the words of his brother Kieran Riviere very well. The lover of humanity's strongest player has stated that she, too, will fight for humanity's survival. The young man who returned to the past said that he was glad to hear this, and noted that they would definitely meet again. Perseus Estel said that he would look forward to his next meeting with Mr. Kieran Riviere. Faustina Smith thought her lover had a gift for speaking. And when had he first learned to speak like that? Kieran Rivera's mother noticed that her son had already woken up after a rather unusual and long sleep. The woman asked if her son had woken up, and he nodded briefly to calm his mother's worries. Kieran's mother said that her son was probably hungry, so she would cook him something tasty. The guy thought that his mother had calmly accepted what was happening, and that the day of imprisonment had not affected her psyche. The system congratulated Kieran Riviere on once again taking first place in the world rankings of players on the day of lockdown. The young man thought that it didn't matter to him how many effective players there were now, because his result was unattainable. The guy who returned to the past thought that this was why the system decided to give him a reward in advance. Humanity's strongest player couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the card the system handed him. The young man joyfully exclaimed that this simply couldn't be true, since it was an A-rank class change card. The guy saw that he could now change his class to the hidden class of Dark Mage's Apprentice. Kieran Riviere knew that in his past life, a person with this class had evolved and single-handedly wiped out an entire city. The young man understood that the man was clearly a villain, but the power of this class simply could not be denied. The guy knew that in the world there is no division between good and evil professions, because it can become both a blade and a shield. Kieran thought that he already had a class, so he should find a reliable owner for this card. Kieran Rivera's mother said her son's favorite noodles were ready and he could go eat. Humanity's strongest player thanked his mother for her concern and thought that other matters could wait. The guy thought that now he could just take it and enjoy this calm, everyday life. Kieran's mother asked her son if he liked the noodles, and he said they were very tasty, and then heard a knock on the door. The woman opened the door and saw Faustina Smith standing there with a very worried look on her face. Kieran Riviere asked what happened to his girlfriend and why she looked so upset. The girl asked her boyfriend why her parents fell into a coma and whether they too had become players of the day of lockdown. Humanity's best player replied that Faustina had understood correctly, as her parents' consciousness was now locked in the game. Kieran's beloved Rivera asked if there was any way to save them from this unenviable fate. The guy said that, to begin with, the girl shouldn't worry, because at the moment there was no other way out. The young man at the top of the rankings thought that only the C-rank Freedom card could save her parents. Kieran Riviere knew that anyone who died on the day of imprisonment would fall into a permanent coma in the real world. Faustina Smith asked if there was really nothing they could do to help her parents. Humanity's strongest player in the game, day of imprisonment, thought he should calm the girl down. The young man who returned to the past thought that he could very well entrust the class change card to Faustina Smith. Kieran Riviere claimed he knew of a way to pull the girl's parents out of their sudden coma on lockdown day. The guy said that his beloved should use this class card to become significantly stronger at once. The young man added that the girl should quickly clear every dungeon she encountered in order to become even stronger. Kieran Riviere stated that Faustina must gain a power that would be able to resist the evil gods. The guy at the top of the rankings said that only by defeating those creatures could they bring back the girl's parents. The young man warned that this card had a side effect of causing one to lose one's mind. Kieran Riviere added that if the girl lacks the determination to suppress the negative effects, she will lose herself. The guy who returned to the past said that in this case the girl would turn into an instrument of evil gods. Faustina asked if these cards really had such side effects, since the system didn't have such information. Kieran Riviere replied that there was always some kind of catch hidden in the gifts of evil gods that the system would not reveal. The boy knew that changing classes gave him the opportunity to become stronger, but at the same time, it brought despair. The young man added that each day of confinement class card contains a piece of the evil god's consciousness. Humanity's strongest player clarified that this evil god particle is capable of destroying a person's mind. Kieran Riviere said that after this, her consciousness would be absorbed by the evil god, and she would become his instrument. The young man mentally added that the reason why this rule did not work on him was very simple. The boy knew that his mind had long since been tempered in the crucible of trials of his past life, becoming stronger than steel. Kieran Riviere added mentally that since then, he had been driven by only one goal: the destruction of the evil gods. Faustina Smith thought that if she didn't get stronger, her mom and dad would never come out of their coma. The beloved of humanity's strongest player stated that she understood everything and was therefore ready to activate this card. Faustina Smith asked Kieran Riviere to give her the class change card, but her aunt stopped her. The best player's mother said that the girl was acting in the heat of the moment because her parents would never have allowed her to do something like that. Faustina thanked her aunt and said that since Kieran had done this for her, she would do the same for her parents. The girl added that their love for their loved ones is equally strong, so she cannot give up. Kieran Rivera's mother wished her son's girlfriend good luck in this difficult task, and she agreed. Faustina Smith asked the young man to kill her without hesitation if she really turned into a monster. The girl told the system that she was activating the class change card and added that she was hoping for Kieran Riviere. The young man who returned to the past thought that he simply could not kill Faustina without hesitation because he loved her. The world #1 ranked guy recalled how a girl protected him in a past life. Kieran Riviere mentally added that he would not allow the girl to become a puppet of evil gods. The young man promised himself that he would do everything possible to help his beloved pass this test. The guy at the top of the world rankings saw dark streams of energy of an evil god bursting out of the girl. Kieran Rivera's mother asked her beloved son what exactly was happening to Faustina Smith. The young man asked his mother to leave the room and added that he would personally deal with this problem. The boy realized that the consciousness of the evil god from the Dark Mage Apprentice class card had already penetrated the girl's mind. Kieran Riviere mentally added that in order to help his girlfriend, he needed a mental type skill. The boy knew that he did not have such abilities, so he asked Gabriel to come to his aid. The young man thought that there was a being living within him that was capable of this, and Seraphim replied that they were, of course, omnipresent. Kieran Riviere asked the true God to let him into Faustina Smith's subconscious using magic. Gabriel replied that he had such power, but for him, the path into the girl's mind would be closed. Seraphim added that the guy could die right there, and he replied that victory would certainly be his. The true God said that the guy had great self-confidence and fortitude, so he would open the way for him. Gabriel added that if the boy couldn't handle such a small thing, he would no longer be worthy of their help. The young man thought that his mind could not be defeated by any particle of the evil god, even outside the body. Kieran Riviere mentally addressed his beloved and said that he would definitely help her with this test. The guy at the top of the ranking thought that the consciousness of an evil god should not even hope to take away his beloved. The young man who had returned to the past mentally added that he would not allow these creatures to take possession of Faustina Smith. A moment later, the young man opened his eyes and realized that he was in his girlfriend's subconscious. Kieran Riviere wondered if this was really Faustina Smith's mental world. The young man realized that the soul of his beloved was already surrounded by the dark forces of a particle of the evil god. However, humanity's strongest player couldn't figure out why he saw two girls at once in this place. Kieran Riviere thought it was very strange and decided it didn't make much sense now. The particle of the evil god's power asked Faustina if she really hoped to receive his power for free. The Supreme Being added that first, the girl must survive the onslaught of the Dark Element students. Faustina told the second personality that there were more creatures, and she added that they would hold out for the sake of mom and dad. The disciples of the Dark Element used the magic of the evil god to summon dark magical spheres. Kieran Riviere saw that the girls had delayed too long, as the dark magic was about to reach them. The Dark Elemental disciples' magic exploded, releasing even more dark entities. One of Faustina's personalities remarked that if they missed this direct blow, it would be the end for both of them. The girl's second personality said that the first one should create a window for her so that she could attack the main enemy. Faustina Smith replied to herself shyly that there were too many enemies here for her to create a window for her. Kieran Riviere cut down all the Dark Elemental students with one blow and declared that he would help his beloved. The girl couldn't believe her ears when she heard her boyfriend's voice, because she was now in her own consciousness. Faustina's bold personality realized that the young man had learned of her existence, and now it was too late to hide. The young man stated that the Dark Element students were phantoms, so he could not harm them permanently. However, the guy added that he could still help his beloved with these parts of the evil god. The strongest player knew that they couldn't waste much time, because the evil god could absorb her mind at any moment. The young man thought that this creature had once again dared to attack his comrade right before his eyes. Kieran Riviere has stated that he will not allow the evil god to gain control of Faustina Smith. Both of the girls' personalities couldn't believe their eyes, because their boyfriend easily dealt with the creatures of darkness. The brave part of Faustina exclaimed that they would deal with the main monster while Kieran distracted the others. The beloved of humanity's strongest player added that their target is those 3 dark mages. Faustina Smith's sweet and fluffy personality shouted that a huge dark sphere was flying towards them. The second part of the girl instantly reacted and pulled herself away from the destructive magic of the evil god. Kieran's beloved couldn't believe what she saw when she noticed a huge crater from the shadow spell. The girl exclaimed that Kieran Riviere had indeed not lied when he told her about the incredible power of this class. The second part of Faustina Smith noticed that these healthy dark spheres have an absorption effect. Both personalities of Kieran's beloved saw that the dark magicians had summoned a whole multitude of dark spheres. The cute and fluffy part of Faustina Smith asked if this magic could be used in this way too. The girl's second personality noticed that the only difference was in the accumulation of energy and the instant use of the skill. The girlfriend of the guy at the top of the rankings said that you can't just defend yourself from enemy attacks all the time. The girl added that it was time for them to strike back to change the course of this senseless fight. The sweet and fluffy part of Faustina Smith realized that every hit she landed took 10% of the enemy's health. Kieran's lover, Rivera, exclaimed in disappointment that her bullets were doing too little damage. The girl's second personality stated that the very ability to inflict damage on these creatures with dark magic was important to them. The girls decided that one of them would be responsible for evasion, and the other for causing damage to the creatures of the evil god. Faustina thought that this tactic only seemed to be winning, but in reality, their physical indicators were still low. The part of the girl with the gun realized that if her second personality ran out of steam, they would instantly lose the battle. The girl remembered that reloading her weapon also took away a good portion of her stamina. Faustina Smith decided that she had to seize every opportunity to win this battle. Meanwhile, the strongest player asked the dark monsters why they had gathered in a group but did not dare to attack. The guy who entered the mind of his beloved said that since they did not attack him, it meant that he would attack them. The young man who returned to the past added that he felt no pity at all for the offspring of the evil gods. The monsters realized that Kieran Riviere was about to unleash another devastating attack on them. The monsters realized that if they did not gather into a single dark mass, they would instantly lose to this man. The guy who came to the aid of his beloved declared that it was useless for these creatures to run, because he would kill them all. The strongest player of the day of confinement realized that the monsters that had merged together had gained colossal power. The young man thought that now he would have to use more powerful techniques to destroy this creature. Kieran Riviere asked the vile creature before him if this was his true form. The boy who returned to the past noticed that even the tiniest part of the evil god could not be that weak. The dark energy monster became angry at the words of the little man who shouldn't have been here at all. The young man realized that he had managed to drive this monster into a state of rage, and now it was not monitoring its actions. The boy who returned to the past activated a special ability to crush the weak monster. The strongest player mentally added that no matter how weak this huge monster was, he would destroy it. The monster from the darkness asked itself why the boy was calling it weak when it had just blocked its attack. Kieran Riviere thought that the strength of such scum did not matter to him, because he intended to defeat the evil gods. The world's #1 ranked young man activated Pax Sapiens' skill, Heaven Cleaving Strike. The monster, born from the power of the evil god particle, felt that it would not survive the boy's final attack. The strongest player heard unknown voices in his head praising his efforts. The young man asked himself what kind of voices these were that asked him to continue in the same spirit. The guy realized that these were not voices at all, but electromagnetic waves that were being transmitted directly into his brain. Kieran Riviere heard that the unknown people left behind a C-rank card that would give him a chance to counterattack. The young man realized that some of the creatures whose voices he was now hearing had already been assimilated by the evil gods. The boy guessed that the C-rank cards were created by unknown gods, not evil gods, to give him a chance. Kieran realized that the past victors of the day of imprisonment, who were consumed by the evil gods, or trying to help humanity. The young man thought that the gods would not allow C-rank cards into the hands of the players, since they themselves could not resist them. The guy who returned to the past said that he would definitely take advantage of the chance given to him. Riviere added that the civilization of this planet will become a cemetery for evil gods who have doomed many to death. Kieran realized that the consciousness of the evil god had disappeared from this space, and along with it, he began to disappear. The young man knew that this was the mental world of his beloved, and he was just an uninvited guest here. Humanity's strongest player said that it seemed like the girls could handle the remaining monsters themselves. Faustina's personalities asked if the guy was leaving and noticed that he had dealt with the clot of black energy. Kieran Riviere asked the girls to focus on getting their grades because he would be waiting for them both in real life. Faustina's personalities asked what his words meant and thought that their secret should not be revealed to their lover. The girls decided that in reality they would have to pretend that the young man had imagined it all. Meanwhile, one of the last spawns of the evil god particle activated the sphere of dark magic. Faustina Smith's personalities decided that they would have to complete the class change test at the very beginning. The girls decided that saving their mom and dad would begin the moment they became the dark magician's apprentice. The world #1 tennis player said he believes in his girlfriend's success. The boy thought that Faustina was about to embark on the path of fighting the gods and become his most reliable ally. Meanwhile, Kieran's mother thought that despite all her son's reliability, she was still very worried. The woman mentally added that everything that had been happening lately simply did not fit in her head. The mother of humanity's strongest player knew that a huge number of people had suddenly fallen into a deep coma. The woman added that some ordinary people had turned into cruel monsters wreaking havoc. Kieran Rivera's mother thought she herself had recently had a strange dream about stuffed monsters. The woman asked her son and his beloved to return safe and sound from that unreal world. Meanwhile, the guy at the top of the world rankings thought that he had already returned to the real world. The young man who returned to the past mentally added that his girlfriend was still fighting the remnants of the evil god's power. Kieran Riviere thought that his beloved's condition had stabilized, which meant she had almost succeeded. The guy who is #1 in the world player rankings decided to wait for Faustina Smith to change her class. Kieran Riviere thought that very soon his girlfriend would receive a new profession and greatly increase her strength. After some time, the young man noticed a system notification that the girl had changed her player profession. Faustina Smith saw a notification that she had received the Dark Mage Apprentice class and its basic skills. The girl joyfully exclaimed that the change of class was successful, and now she feels new strength. The beloved thanked her boyfriend for helping her subconsciously, because without him, she would not have been able to cope. Faustina Smith mentally added that for now her boyfriend must not know about her big secret. Placido Vernal shouted that the man named Ashton should stop and not do this. Kieran Riviere asked his best friend what had happened to him and why he had called out to someone so loudly. Placido Vernal was surprised when he saw his friend, who was the best player of the day of confinement. The young man screamed, begging Kieran to send him back to the dungeon, because he had to save his comrades. Riviere asked his only friend to calm down, because the dungeons disappear once and for all when players clear them. Placido Vernal asked what happens to the people who died in those damn dungeons on the day of confinement. Kieran thought that everything was going exactly like in his past life, because Placido lost Ashton in the second dungeon. The guy mentally added that in his past life he had only heard bits and pieces of this story from his best friend. The young man thought that he could not have helped in any way in the past, because any advice he gave could have destroyed Vernal. Kieran Riviere added silently that he had even considered taking his friend to his dungeon to protect him from this trauma. Humanity's strongest player thought that such help to his best friend would not do any good. Placido Vernal, heartbroken, admitted that what happened to Ashton was entirely his fault. Kieran Riviere thought he shouldn't be so presumptuous as to make a choice for his friend. The young man, having returned to the past, mentally added that in this life he firmly decided to crush the evil gods. The world #1 player said he had some good news to share at this point. Kieran Riviere noted that Ashton is actually still alive in reality. Placido Vernal was surprised by his best friend's encouraging words and asked how he could know this for sure. Humanity's strongest player replied that his brother could look at the latest news himself. Young Vernal asked what the mass falling into a deep coma had to do with it if Ashton died in the game. Faustina told the short-haired guy that dying in the game puts a person in the real world into a deep coma. Placido was heartened when he learned that his friend was still alive in the real world, just in a vegetable state. The girl said that her parents also fell into a coma, but Kiran reassured her, saying that they could fix everything. Faustina declared that she would have to endure the day of confinement until the very end in order to destroy those who had started this mess. The girl invited Placido to join them, since it would be much easier to destroy those creatures together. The young man who returned to the past thought that in this life, each of them had gained a powerful incentive to defeat the evil gods. The guy at the top of the ranking remembered that in his past life, his comrades were defeated due to a lack of information. Kiran Riviere added silently that as long as that fire burned within them, hope would always remain alive. The strongest player of the day of confinement said that their first priority now will be to raise Placido's level. Kiran added that his friend had fallen far behind them, and he didn't believe that level 5 was no longer enough. The young man thought that young Vernal had only received one power card, and everything else had come from the final reward. A guy with a crew cut asked what his schizophrenic best friend's girlfriend's current level was. Faustina Smith replied that her level was not that high, since she was driven by Kiran Riviere. Placido Vernal was taken aback when he saw that the girl was already level 9, had a revolver, and was an A-rank special class. The young man noticed that the girl could crush him with one hand and asked how strong brother Kiran was then. The crew cut guy yelled that his best friend had become even more insane since their last meeting. Placido exclaimed that he had not begged his friend for anything, but had asked Kiran to drag him through at least one dungeon. The young man stated that he wants to protect the people dear to him, so he is ready to fight even against all powerful creatures. Kiran Riviere thought that the hope of his only friend was also his cherished wish. The guy who returned to the past said that he would, of course, help Placido become stronger. The top-ranked young man added that they first need to figure out who exactly they will be fighting. Humanity's strongest player told his comrades that he calls his enemies evil gods. Placido Vernal and Faustina Smith asked what other evil gods Kiran Riviere was talking about. The young man stated that for now they need not worry, as the evil gods are currently locked in the day of imprisonment. The guy who is number 1 in the world rankings said that this is one of the rules that they have to follow. The strongest player said that as soon as the winner of the game is determined, higher beings will appear on Earth. The young man said that these monsters would swallow the entire Earth in an instant, plunging it into primordial chaos. Faustina Smith was surprised that their enemy was space monsters of such incredible scale. Placido Vernal said it was simply an impossible task, and Kiran asked if his brother had decided to give up. The best player's girlfriend thought that her mom and dad would not come out of a coma if she gave up. The crew cut guy remembered how he lost Ashton in the final dungeon of the day of lockdown. Kiran Rivera's supporters shouted in one voice that they would never give up. The young man who returned to the past said that in that case, he would tell them about the only chance of victory. The guy added that their only chance of triumph lay in those 15 special C-rank cards. The strongest player in humanity said that each of these cards contains colossal power. Kiran Riviere stated that they must collect them all in order to give the evil gods a full-fledged fight. Placido exclaimed that the plan was crystal clear, and Faustina noted that they would help Kiran get C-rank cards. The girl asked how many dungeons there were in the day of confinement, and in which of them these special cards were hidden. The young man stated that the gods had intertwined the dungeons with human society, which is why the number of trials exceeded 1,000. The strongest player's lover indignantly shouted that they would never be able to visit every dungeon. Young Vernal stated that his friend had compiled guides to the starting dungeons. Were there really that many of them? Kiran replied that there were only 19 starting dungeons, so he didn't have to stress about writing guides. The young man said that C-rank cards are difficult to obtain, but he knows of a dungeon with a guaranteed reward. The guy with the number 1 spot in the world rankings said that one woman was already supposed to betray humanity. Kiran said that his comrades should rest, and added that they would go to the next dungeon together. Faustina thought that she had already received a class, which meant she needed to make every effort to become stronger. The young man who returned to the past thought that he needed to meet that traitor to humanity in person. After some time, Kiran's ex-girlfriend said that she did not expect to receive an invitation from the guy to meet. The guy said he wanted to get down to business and asked if the girl had completed the 2 dungeons of the day of imprisonment. The young man's ex-girlfriend replied that fortunately she was lucky, since she had miraculously escaped twice already. The young man thought that in his past life he had also crossed paths with her around this time. But everything was different. The guy remembered well that in that life this girl turned into an obedient puppet of evil gods. Kieran Riviere thought that selling his soul in exchange for salvation was not a miraculous salvation. The young man mentally added that ordinary people do not notice mental influence, but he sees everything. The guy who returned to the past understood that this girl emanated an ominous aura of evil gods. The young man understood that those creatures could only give her power in exchange for her assistance in exterminating the players. The girl who betrayed humanity asked if Kieran Riviere had really called her here for the sake of empty chatter. The ex-girlfriend of a guy at the top of the world rankings asked the guy if he wanted to do something more interesting. The girl thought that even the #1 in the world rankings would not be able to resist her magnificent body. The young man's ex-girlfriend decided that if her master absorbed the strongest man, he would provide her with a comfortable life. The girl mentally added that she was fed up with this damn game, because she no longer had the strength to return to it. Kieran's ex-girlfriend, Rivera, thought the life of a top player would be the perfect stepping stone to her salvation. The young man said that he had thought about it for a long time and decided that he would go to the next dungeon with his old friend. The girl couldn't believe her ears, because she didn't even have time to hint to the guy about it, and he himself suggested it. Kieran Riviere offered to shake hands if his old friend would agree to go into the dungeon with him. The girl who betrayed humanity could not believe that fate had given her such a gift. The young man's old friend from the top of the ranking exclaimed that, of course, she agreed to this wonderful proposal. The young man said that if the girl needed anything else, he would gladly agree. Kieran Riviere suggested that his old friend meet him in the dungeon immediately after the system's countdown ended. The girl who served the evil god wondered if this freak would continue to pretend that he was not interested in her. The best player's girlfriend mentally added that no man had ever behaved so dismissively towards her. 3 days later, the system notified players that the countdown had ended and wished everyone a pleasant game. Kieran Riviere reminded his best friend that he should not forget the rules he had told him. Placido Vernal exclaimed that, of course, he remembered everything, since he had been cramming them all night long. The youth who returned to the past said that he would now activate the second property of the C-rank Freedom card. The guy confirmed that he wants to enter the dungeon of the player Irina Inkwell, Doomsday Park.